Sukuna is one of, if not the craziest villain in straight up all of anime. But the first thing this 1000 plus year old unk ever does, and we can never trust the uncle, is steal a high school aged family member's body, then come out the gate screaming that he can't wait to absolutely violate a bunch of poor innocent civilians. He's a mental case who seemingly no one, not even the greatest sorcerers of the Heian era, were able to put down. When it comes to the current day Jujutsu Kaisen, and after defeating Gojo, rip the strongest, he got freaking cooked, Sukuna has had one of the craziest continuous battles ever. For what seems like years at this point, he's been in an ever-evolving battle with almost every sorcerer of importance that's, obviously still alive. In today's video, we're going to cover it all, from Kashimo to Miguel, all the way up until it gets a little bit more personal just between Yuji and Sukuna. Of course, if you want more content just like this, then subscribe and also leave a like, as it really helps out with pushing my content to a bunch of new amazing people. Plus, if you have heard the news that Jujutsu Kaisen is ending soon, be sure to let me know your thoughts on the series in general down below, and once it does end, I'll be sure to cover both the Shinjuku Showdown arc in its entirety and the full story itself, including the first 2 seasons which I originally missed. But either way, sit back and relax and enjoy the battles. Flashing up into the sky, we see that without any time for anyone to mourn or feel sorrow for Gojo's death, the one that came in to take his place against the King of Curses was no one other than the Thunder God, Hajime Kashimo. Hovering 203 meters off the ground, Kashimo himself is surprised when he notices an object falling from even further up. Atop that meteor-sized piece of ice was none other than the frozen queen herself. Getting surprised herself though, above Uraume appeared Hikari, yelling out that she won't be going anywhere. Not interested at all in taking on the special grade sorcerer, Uraume prepares her ice formation, while simultaneously Hikari pulls up his hands and activates his domain expansion. Even though Hikari was able to trap the Ice Queen within his own domain, the large block of ice that she stood on kept plummeting towards the earth below. Down below, of course, was none other than the King of Curses, who began extending his hand towards the now melting iceberg. Now, like a torrential ocean wave, all of the ice melts into water under an endothermic reaction, allowing the one-handed demon to grab a certain object. So, remember back to when Uraume tried to show Sukuna love but absolutely failed? Well, in the end, and in a similar way to Mai, she used her innate technique creation to use her remaining curse energy to create a specific item. Now with this dagger-like item clenched firmly in the hand of the one that she used to love, it's revealed that what Uraume created was a replica of an ancient item Sukuna used to wield, the curse tool Kamatoke. This tool's ability seems to be one that allows the user to control some form of electricity. Within milliseconds of receiving the tool, Sukuna launches a blast towards his opponent, which, hilariously enough, is perfectly countered by the effects of Kashimo's own cursed energy. Speaking up now, Kashimo asks the King of Curses if he earned the title of the strongest, or was he simply born with unbeatable prowess. Not actually having a clue himself, Sukuna answers that he can't say much, but what he can say is that he was born accursed, an unwanted little wretch. Still in conversation, he asks how Sukuna is able to connect with others. How can he love those beneath him without knowing some kind of weakness? To Kashimo, it's something that he just can't comprehend. He was always surrounded by the most feeble and pathetic people, no more than dirt in the eyes of curse energy or pebbles of sand on a beach. In an attempt to understand him, he pleads for Sukuna to enlighten him. Is strength itself solitude, or is the endless search for greater power simply a burden the strong have to bear alone? Amused with just how greedy Kashimo is for asking about information on who he was, Sukuna chuckles, but lets him know that he'll teach him, so be sure to give him his best shot. Absolutely stoked with the chance of a lifetime, and something he has personally waited hundreds of years for, Kashimo bursts forth. Jumping up, he slams his staff down atop Sukuna, only for him to comfortably block with an electric burst before darting out of striking range. Activating his one-time use innate technique, Kashimo releases his awed-over mythic beast Amber and proceeds to sock a shock Sukuna with a flurry of punches, sending him sliding back. Warping his body into an otherworldly form, Kashimo directs his face at his opponent and sends a blast of electricity that explodes upon contact with him. Joking that this form of his is far too loud, it's explained that mythic beast Amber transforms Kashimo's body into something else. I kind of think of it like Ino's auspicious beast technique, but instead of being an intermediary, Kashimo literally becomes one of these mythic beasts, warping his body with curse energy to resemble it, in this example, the Amber version. During the time this ability is active, Kashimo can use any phenomena that can be created by electricity, until his curse energy runs out. I just want to mention that this means it's possible Kashimo can travel at 90% the speed of light, or over 250,000 kilometers per second, at this, point for a limited amount of time. Using this speed increase to his advantage, Kashimo takes Sukuna somewhat by surprise and sends a blast of sonic electricity into the ground directly below him. Instantly following this, Kashimo throws a fat right hook, connecting with Sukuna's face and sending him back, leaving him flattened upon the ground. It's explained that by activating this technique, Kashimo's agility increases. He can optimize the sound and tune out incorrect noises to match natural frequencies. If any object is sent at him, it's quickly vaporized due to the electromagnetic waves flowing off his body. Yet, once this technique concludes, and because of how badly Kashimo's body is being exerted with curse energy, he will crumble to dust and die. Using an effect of his own curse energy and having placed a positive charge on Sukuna when he hit him, Kashimo releases the negative one and sends a current of electricity that instantaneously connects with the King of Curse's already weakened body. So, apart from a reverse curse technique, Sukuna actually has a method of restoring his original body. One that he isn't able to abuse and can only use a singular time. A certain method that he'd been intentionally waiting to use since the beginning. This method was, like the other members of the Killing Game, resuming his transformation through means of incarnation. Activating his X-ray vision, Kashimo is able to analyze the slowly approaching demon. Without a doubt, what stood in front of him was perfection. When it comes to just how broken Sukuna actually is, everyone needs to realize that the reason he has extra body parts, and possibly even internal organs, is so that his hands remain uninhibited. Then, while performing a chant, his lungs remain free, and his heart isn't burdened by the added effects. All of these extra body parts provide Sukuna with an immense advantage over anyone else. He may be physically deformed, but that doesn't matter or impede him in the slightest. Instead, as I've mentioned, it adds to his potential. During the Heian period, Sukuna was armed with both his incredible strength and the curse tools known as the Supreme Martial Solution and Heiten. Heiten is supposedly the large trident-like staff that he wields that we've seen in some art and whatnot. Whereas the Kamutoke that Yorizu created is most likely the recreation of the Supreme Martial Solution. With these items, Sukuna annihilated the Sun, Moon, and Stars squad, and the 5 Void Generals that served as guards to the Northern Fujiwara clan. Then, on top of that, he decisively defeated the Abe clan's elite forces, which included Angels, whatever the hell that means, and the Deshi Pacification Squad, who themselves were composed of Sugawara clan members. Utterly blown away with the unreal achievements Sukuna was able to complete over his life, Kashimo can only fawn over how beautiful the Demon King's true form seems. Taking the offensive now, Sukuna rushes at Kashimo and manages to land a double right-handed body strike that launches the sorcerer up into the sky. Using the height to his advantage now, Kashimo shoots a blast of condensed electricity directly at his foe. Unconcerned, Sukuna with his second mouth begins chanting while simultaneously telling Kashimo that he should probably dodge the strike. Out of nowhere, Dismantle is sent forth and manages to slice the palm of Kashimo's improved mythic beast form. Instantly, the special grade sorcerer realizes that this is the same ability that was able to finish Gojo off, as it was a slash that cut the world itself. Standing there, absolutely jacked out of his freaking mind, Sukuna jokes that a fool once tried to teach him about love, yet she didn't even know what love was and was also insanely lonely. Sukuna explains that he understood what she was trying to say, however, she just had the wrong guy. In his eyes, she'd have more luck preaching her love to someone like Kashimo or Gojo. It's not that they didn't know what love was, it was just that they were unable to understand it themselves. Completely confused with what he was even trying to say, Kashimo queries him, only for Sukuna to ask him a bold question in itself. He was strong, right? Powering up as if it's his last chance, because this is. Kashimo unleashes waves of electricity that shoot out in every direction. Undeterred by the power increase, Sukuna catches Kashimo off guard and appears right behind him, grabbing his hands and pummeling him with his two free ones. Coughing up blood now, Sukuna slams him onto the ground and throws a demonstrably weaker sorcerer across a decimated landscape of Shinjuku. Pulling up his hand in preparation for his next cursed electricity blast, Kashimo is just left stunned. In front of him now, and with seemingly no escape, a bunch of world-slashing dismantles, all overlapping to form a net, rush forth like a torrential wave of death. All of a sudden, and flashing away to a place that probably feels more like home than anything for Kashimo, he hears someone speaking some wise words behind him. Many of the world's strongest fighters must have challenged him. Still, with all of their strength and spiritual dominance, they never cursed him in death. In actuality, it's more that they just wanted recognition from him, then that would give them an understanding of what they are truly worth. Yet, he butchered every last one of them, all while simultaneously wondering how he was to properly care for others. In the eyes of the wise Sukuna, if that isn't loving kindness, then what else could it even be? He knows that most people love them for the strength they possess, then they respond to that love. Speaking up now and wondering if Sukuna is satisfied, Kashimo asks if that is the case. Then queries, why did he decide to divide his soul and move through time as a cursed object? Understanding this, Sukuna just tells him that love is worthless. Through life, he's never needed anyone to satisfy him. He eats whenever he wants and plays with whatever amuses him. He lives life as it befits his nature, and if no one is able to get that through their thick skulls, then that's their problem. Chuckling with Sukuna's explanation, Kashimo just asks if it ever gets old, but is quickly told that it doesn't. Every human has a unique and exuberant taste, which makes devouring them a perfect way to pass the time until death arrives. I want to point out that unlike, when Gojo died, Kashimo wasn't surrounded by all of his loved friends and family, just Sukuna. I wonder if that's possibly because he was a part of the culling game and that's just the effects of it or something, I don't know. Kind of reminded me of Jogoat's death for a moment, with just how quickly he was living and then in the Shadow Realm. I wish we got to see more, but this is, realistic battle-wise. Thinking that Kashimo was even going to last a third as long as Gojo did is absolutely nuts. Either way, and back in reality now with Akari's domain shattering, Sukuna turns to see a certain someone arriving on the battlefield. Arriving at the scene, the genius Uraume and his boy Yuji descend from the sky, while in front of them, Sukuna watches with the smirkiest of grins. At an earlier time though, back when the Sorcerers were plotting prior to the Sukuna vs Gojo battle, the dog, like, bro was an actual demon, Kusakabe reiterated their Takaba backup plan. However, he points out he needs to return here as soon as possible. Their main issue is Sukuna. Even if it's an all-out battle, they still have to figure out who they're going to send in. Kashimo, Bean himself, points out how an all-out battle means everyone will be involved, yet he knows it's him who's rolling in first. Rebuking this though, Kusakabe says there would be no point in sending in people who have no chance of survival or ones that can't create an opening for others. When it comes to the merger itself, Kusakabe lets them all know he has a feeling sorcerers will most likely be able to prevent themselves from being included. Even if Sukuna and Kenny end up getting their way, he doesn't think it's possible to survive the merger when the resulting monster is one that can wreak havoc on the planet itself. No matter what though, he feels like they at least have a few days before the merger might begin, even more possibly if Sukuna is the only one who survives the upcoming battles. Suddenly, Noritoshi Kamo stands up and informs everyone that he won't be able to join them. He doesn't think he'll be of any assistance and would instead like to watch over his family, even if only for a short while. Going to apologize for this, Kusakabe cuts him off and reminds the group that this isn't a public execution and doesn't need to hear everyone's explanations for taking part. Bringing up the conditions needed for those who want to take part, Kusakabe simply lists that they must be able to use reverse Kus technique and or don't mind dying. Anyone else will be backup or sit out of the bouts entirely. Raising his hand, the gloomy looking Uraume offers to go in after Kashimo as his curse technique Confiscate might be able to seal his ability. On top of this, he elaborates that if Sukuna received the death penalty from his deadly sentencing, he could battle him with the Executioner's sword. While he acknowledged that the sword is a fantastic idea, Kusakabe was skeptical of whether a verdict for confiscation or death could be ruled. Knowing how the technique somewhat works himself, Yuji confirms that Uraume cannot control what charges judgment is able to pin on Sukuna. Given Sukuna's actions that led to deaths at the detention center and in Shibuya, as well as possibly more crimes committed while possessing Megami, Yuji believes that it's more than likely judgment would give Sukuna a death sentence. However, Uraume doesn't agree. In short, Sukuna's crimes so far were bodily injury to Yuji, attempted murder of Gojo at Yuji's high school, attempted murder of Yuji and Megami at the detention center, the murders of Mimiko, Nanako and Haruta, attempted murder of numerous civilians, arson of inhabited buildings throughout Shibuya, and finally, my favourite, grievous bodily harm, attempted murder or illegal possession of a dead body due to him taking over Megami. It's kinda unknown what exactly that last one is, it mainly depends on Megami's current condition and everything, but you know, either way. Yuji brings up how the circumstances of the detention center were far worse than those. Still, Uraume believed it would be hard to accuse Sukuna of crimes committed by his cursed objects. He did commit these crimes, albeit indirectly, so it wouldn't exactly fall under aiding and abetting. In a similar vein, it would be difficult to charge him with the murder of Junpei's mother. Listing out the varying punishments for a guilty verdict under the charge of murder, a singular kill will typically result in imprisonment with hard labour for 10 to 15 years. For 2 deaths, life in prison or even the death penalty is actually possible. For the murder of 3 or more people though, the death penalty is the most common outcome. Uraume believed that, according to the Nagayama standard, Sukuna would be completely impossible to rehabilitate, based on the dangers he posed to society. In turn, this would lead to a death penalty, at least under normal trial circumstances. Unable to even compute what bro is actually saying, Miwa looks over at Kusakabe, who seems to understand exactly what it is. However, she immediately calls him out for not even having a clue what Higuruma is actually talking about. Proving her wrong, Kusakabe then explained that while the totality of Sukuna's crimes would result in a death penalty, Higuruma's curse technique tries each crime individually, which means there's at least a 30% chance of Sukuna being tried for a crime that would result in the death penalty. Still, he brings up how each of his major crimes are also attached to a bunch of extremely minor offences. Agreeing with this, Higuruma elaborates that it's possible Judgment could actually prosecute Sukuna for property damage or breaking and entering at Shibuya rather than the massacre itself, which further lowers their chance at securing a death penalty here. Lastly, Higuruma then brought up a third problem. Sukuna could possibly be charged with crimes from over 1000 years ago. And the modern set of laws introduced during the Meiji era had introduced the general idea of a statute of limitations. Yet, later in 2010, the statute of limitations regarding murder was abolished, bringing a lot of confusion into whether or not the previous crimes could actually be brought up. The previous crimes from Sukuna's past, that is. Yuji, just confused about this all, assumes that there's no statute of limitations on Sukuna then. Rebuking him though, Higuruma continues that the statute of limitations is still valid regarding murders that happened before 1985. However, the Heian era's governing rules, also known as the Yoro Code, didn't include a statute of limitations themselves. Actually just done here, Yuji irked asked which one it is, but Higuruma admittedly doesn't actually know himself, especially since the issue is further complicated by time prior to Sukuna's incarnation in modern times. Since Judgment is a Shikigami connected to his own curse technique, Higuruma knows that if he sees something as even remotely possible, so too will Judgment. Taking everything into account, Kusakabe concludes that Sukuna's crimes from 1000 years ago, Judgment's own discretion, and Sukuna's countless potential crimes in the modern day meant that the chances of Judgment accusing him of a crime that guaranteed a death penalty was extremely low. Nonetheless, Hikari thanked Higuruma for his willingness to participate, as even on the off chance confiscation worked, it would be of a great help to all of the sorcerers. However, Higuruma actually points out that he's still unsure if both of Sukuna's techniques would even be confiscated, since he's never been able to trial someone with multiple techniques. Suddenly, Yuji proposed a way where he may be able to guarantee the death penalty for Sukuna. Flashing back to the present, several crows, powered by Mei-Mei's bird strike, fly towards Sukuna. Easily noticing them in time, Sukuna quickly moves to the side and strikes them down with lightning using Kamotoke. Observing this from afar, Mei-Mei notes how Sorcerers of Gojo, Kenjaku, and even Sukuna's Calibra all chose to strike down the crows, allowing her to surmise that Bird Strike is probably capable of doing damage to them. That being said, she then reveals that this was all a distraction for Higuruma and the rest is now up to him. Suddenly, a massive gavel strikes down on the ground in front of Sukuna. Having dodged the smash, the demon looks to his right as Yuji suddenly appears next to him, shattering the debris with a rapid succession of blows, creating a dust screen, allowing him to get in close and further sock Sukuna with a strike that sends him sliding back. Confused on the weird feeling coming from Yuji's fist, Sukuna then watches as Higuruma announces that they are having a retrial. In an instant, Higuruma activates his domain expansion, Deadly Sentencing, constructing the courtroom around the three sorcerers. Skipping back and during their pre-planning, Yuji came out with the idea of an appeal. Instead of trying Sukuna, they'll have a retrial for the previous case and actually drag Sukuna into it. This way, it then 100% allows them to charge Sukuna with the massacre during Shibuya. Deadly Sentencing chooses one of 3 court tiers at random when prosecuting. if he applies for a retrial for a case that's already been settled under the pretense of Sukuna being added as a co-defendant, then reopening that case may be possible. Even if he fails to convict Sukuna, this would nonetheless allow them to narrow down the crimes to when Sukuna was incarnated inside Yuji's body. Back inside of the domain, Judgment reads out that Yuji has been accused under suspicion of committing mass murder in Shibuya on October 31st, 2018. Retrieving the case file, Haguruma announces that Yuji never killed anyone. His previous confession in High Court was a false one, motivated by a strong sense of personal accountability. Instead, he postulates that the real culprit is the King of Curses, Uraume Sukuna. Elsewhere in Shinjuku, Hikari and Uraume fly through the air, darting over the rooftops as they battle each other. Uraume uses Frost Calm, breathing out super cool curse energy that creates a large block of ice while encasing Hikari's right arm in it. Instantly following up, Uraume then punches the ice, shattering it and destroying Hikari's arm. Manipulating some cold air in between their hands, Uraume thanks Hikari for joining her in battle. In a flash, the third-year student instantly regenerates his arm and grabs the ancient one by the face before proceeding to slam them through an apartment building. By the way, I've always wondered, do you think Uraume froze herself and timed a perfect thaw to re-emerge into today's timeline? Or do you think she was like all of the other incarnated sorcerers and was just brought back by Kenny? I don't know. But either way, and back on the ground, Uraume slides backwards along the road while creating a large ice spike. She notes that, in terms of regenerative speed, Hikari surpasses the likes of Sukuna and Gojo. Biffing the icicle forwards, Uraume lands a fatal strike that pierces Hikari's side. Still, it doesn't slow him down and the actual goat continues to rush towards her. Healing his previous wound, Hikari, having gotten in close now, throws a fat right kick that connects with the chest of the ancient sorcerer. Having fooled Hikari into a false sense of security though, Uraume grabs the sorcerer's leg before beginning to quickly freeze it. However, Hikari, ever the crafty maniac, opts to break it off, instantly regrowing it and kicking Uraume with both of his feet. The power behind the dropkick actually launches the female sorcerer through several buildings, giving Hikari enough time to grab his shoe and put it back on. Giving chase now, Hikari stops and listens as Uraume begins to compliment him. For some weird reason that she just can't seem to explain, these modern era sorcerers have a sick obsession with remaining human. They also desperately want to hold on to their humanity, constantly telling themselves to hold back from destroying what would be so easily crushed with their own overwhelming power. To Uraume, it is that human fear of being alone that makes them so weak. Standing opposite Hikari as all of the water below them explodes from the underground pipes, soaking both of the sorcerers, Uraume tells Hikari that he's different. He doesn't share the same fears as other modern sorcerers, and because of that, she will no longer think of him as a human. Moving into her fighting pose, she states that she will destroy him with the full extent of her power. With the water beginning to puddle around his feet, Hikari remembers a similar conversation he had with Yuta. He knows the man's a little bit of a depressed fellow, but at the end of the day, he sticks to his words and you can't help but respect him because of that. Throwing his hands to the side, Hikari screams that he's getting real hyped up here and demands that the woman in front of him bring him an ice cold beer. Meanwhile, inside of the deadly sentencing domain, Haguruma begins divulging the rules of the domain to Sukuna. Having been given a select piece of evidence, Haguruma thinks that their victory is secured, since the evidence that was given to him was the same evidence used in Yuji's second trial, proof that Sukuna was in possession of the boy's body while committing the mass murder at Shibuya. However, Sukuna suddenly interrupts him and explains that he already heard the rules of this domain when he was inside Yuji. What he's actually interested in is that sword of his. He doesn't give an actual shit about what he did when or where. Wanting to end it here, he admits guilty to all of the charges, causing judgment to sentence him to confiscation and the death penalty. In a flash, Higuruma's domain vanishes, dropping them back down to the ground and changing his gavel into the famed Executioner's Sword. Standing there with his blade ready, Higuruma speculates that it's likely Sukuna lost his ability to use the Ten Shadows technique during his battle with Gojo. So there's a high possibility that what was confiscated was his shrine. Assuming that he doesn't have a curse technique anymore, Higuruma feels like he's now in complete control with his sword. With this one-shot chance at victory, the Jujutsu High Sorcerers could not afford to let this slip through their grasp, and in the same moment, they all sprang into action. Suddenly, Higuruma stops as he remembers Yuji's words to him. Do you have a death wish? As all of the sorcerers started closing in on Sukuna in the center, the only ones who realized that something was wrong with this seemingly perfect opportunity was Sukuna and Higuruma himself. Rushing forwards, a flurry of slashes suddenly slice into the lawyer and Kusakabe, bringing the duo closer to their incoming demise. Remembering that Sukuna wielded Kamutoke, Higuruma realizes that if the target of confiscation was already carrying a curse tool, then confiscation will take away that curse tool instead of their curse technique. Beating himself up mentally, Higuruma curses his inexperience. Not concerned, Kusakabe activates Simple Domain to protect himself from Sukuna's slashes. Sensing all those around, Sukuna notices that all of his opponents have leveled up their fundamentals in Cursed Energy Strengthening. On top of that, yet not to the same degree as Domain Amplification, Kusakabe's Simple Domain somehow weakened his own technique. Meanwhile, Kusakabe, who was almost certain he was about to die, begins to speculate. He knows now that not all of Sukuna's slashes are capable of slashing through the world itself. It makes sense to him that he'd need to charge up the technique in some kind of way or use a binding vow in order to expand the target of his technique. Kusakabe then breaks down each of Sukuna's techniques and summarizes that Cleave, a point-blank dismantle, and the enhanced dismantle cannot be defended against and will generally result in death. He wonders why Sukuna isn't also using his fire like he did back in Shibuya, but gives up on worrying about that for now, which I'm actually almost 100% sure is going to play some form of role later on in the battle. Either way, yelling out, Kusakabe checks up on Higuruma, who apologizes for being unable to confiscate Sukuna's technique. Fixating his gaze on Sukuna though, Kusakabe reassures him that robbing him of Kamutoke is good enough, and promises to put his own life on the line to protect him, since his sword is their best chance at currently defeating the King of Curses. Opposite them, Sukuna jokes that it's good they've upped their defenses, still, he's gonna actually go for their legs now. Jumping in though, Choso fires a piercing blood at Sukuna. However, before it even hits, he asks them for a race, suddenly vanishing from sight. Instantly, he then reappears behind Choso and pierces two of his hands through his body, fatally wounding him before tossing him aside and heading towards Yuji. Ino then appears above and biffs Nanami's blunt sword down at Sukuna. Still, he comfortably deflects the blade back into the air. Falling down and catching his sensei's blade, Ino slashes down at Sukuna with it. Despite blocking the blunt sword with his arm, Sukuna feels the strike being stronger than he initially expected. Upon closer examination, he realizes that the curse tool is imbued with Nanami's 7-3 ratio technique. Unconcerned, he throws a fat kick that Ino just barely blocks with his sword, but nonetheless feels the heavy force from it as it sends him sliding away. Darting in from either side, Yuji and Kusakabe go to attack, but are quickly driven back by Sukuna's slashes. Jumping in over the back of his teammate, Higuruma slashes at Sukuna with his Executioner's sword, but misses and is instead caught by Sukuna's grasp while being brutally pummeled. Grabbing him by the scruff of his suit and asking if the others think they can keep up, Sukuna tosses Higuruma across the battlefield and through buildings before giving chase. Boosting off in Cell's direction, Yuji screams for them to not let Sukuna get Higuruma alone. Up ahead, Higuruma catches his fall inside of a destroyed building. However, having gone like Mark 3 or something, Sukuna appears before him and unleashes slashes that cut apart the building. Back before everything actually kicked off in this fight here, Yuji informed the others that Higuruma's curse technique could be used to save Megumi. Explaining it himself, Higuruma says that those who were cut by the executioner's sword will die without exception. However, without fail, the target will be limited to the one sentenced. Judgment, throughout the series so far, has demonstrated the ability to distinguish multiple souls with an incarnated body, as seen with Yuji previously. In turn, killing Sukuna with the executioner's sword would allow them to somehow retrieve the sleeping, unharmed Megumi. Later that night now, Yuji asked Higuruma that previously mentioned question. Did he want to die? Sitting there, Higuruma explained that he is a man who has been abandoned and abandoned the law himself. In the end, he wants to be the one who punishes himself. To do that, it's just like Yuji said, he wants to fulfill his role and then die in battle. Somewhat understanding where bro's coming from, Yuji agrees with the sentiment but still felt that Higuruma should stay alive. Telling him to not say such ridiculous things though, Higuruma lets Yuji know that he's turned into someone who can no longer even look him in the eyes due to the guilt he carries. Back in the present, it is revealed that Higuruma somehow used domain amplification to neutralize Sukuna's slashes. Having awakened as a Jujutsu sorcerer only less than 2 months ago now, Higuruma's extraordinary growth with Jujutsu sorcery fascinates Sukuna. He wholeheartedly believes his talent, from the beautiful light that resonates from his lethal blade to his unbound depths of skill, even rivals that of Satoru Gojo. So, what Sukuna is actually blown away by isn't that Higuruma can use domain amplification. He's more intrigued by how he lowered the anti-domain technique, but somehow resumed his original technique's effect after. When Sukuna did this against Gojo, he had to pay close attention to only pause and not completely invalidate Maharaga's adaptation. He too is somehow managing to keep his sword lit between amplifications, and because of that, there is no doubt to Sukuna that this man is able to manipulate curse energy to a similar degree as himself. Fascinated, Sukuna asks if he is indeed Uraume Higuruma. Simultaneously, with his other hand, the King of Curses forms hand signs, sending out a plethora of cuts that absolutely destroy the building. Yuji, who arrived outside the building as this happened, joins the battle. Standing on the falling debris, Higuruma charges at Sukuna, but is distracted by a piece of debris near his face that Sukuna shattered using Dismantle. Taking advantage of Higuruma's distraction, Sukuna approaches Yuji, who tries to punch him and protect Higuruma. However, Sukuna intercepts his arm and grabs the left side of his torso before activating Cleave, cutting half of Yuji's body into small cube-like pieces. As the bloodied young man falls to the ground, Sukuna tells him to take a good look in the mirror. He's a complete bore, and there isn't a single interesting bone in his disgusting body. As the destroyed building collapses onto the ground, Sukuna and Higuruma emerge from the wreckage and continue their battle. Seeing Sukuna on the road above, Higuruma jumps up and tries to hit him with the executioner's sword. Sadly, Sukuna is able to effortlessly dodge every strike and lands a few strikes that rock the newly awakened sorcerer himself. Eventually, Sukuna gets in behind before jumping away from Higuruma and beginning to chant the incantations for Dismantle. Scale of the Dragon, Recoil, Twin Meteors. Sukuna points his hand forth, activating Dismantle and unleashing a slash that cuts the world itself. As the smoke clears and seeing that he was able to dodge the slash, Sukuna tells Higuruma to give healing himself a go. Higuruma tries to bear through the pain, but knows it's clear as day. No matter how cold-hearted he is, no matter how thorough his resolve may be, the pain is still unbearable. Watching him stand, Sukuna cuts off his other hand and slashes his legs, preventing him from moving forward. Threatening him, Sukuna tells the sorcerer that next it's his head he'll remove if he doesn't heal himself now with reverse curse technique. As Higuruma remembers his previous statement to Yuji and poses what his role really is, Sukuna is suddenly hit by piercing blood, though he once again comfortably blocks it with his arm and notes that it's the technique of the oldest cursed womb death painting. Seizing the opportunity though provided by the brief distraction, Higuruma immediately regenerates his right arm and heals his legs with a reverse curse technique and seemingly stabs Sukuna in the hand with the executioner's sword. However, in a sick twist, the King of Curses reveals that he cut off his own hand milliseconds before Higuruma pierced it, but commends him for his effort nonetheless. In a flash, Sukuna activates Cleave on Higuruma, causing him to preemptively wince in pain and start to remember a conversation he had with Kusakabe about curses becoming stronger after death. In a moment of selflessness, Higuruma then tosses the curse inside of the executioner's blade over Sukuna's shoulder, allowing Yuji to dive in and catch it. With Higuruma being slashed apart in that moment, he finally looks Yuji in the eyes and tells him that he has done all he can. Recalling Nanami's last words once more, Yuji gets gassed up and prepares to stab Sukuna in the back with the executioner's sword. Sensing Yuji going to strike down on him with the executioner's sword, Sukuna dodges out of the way. Glancing at his palm, Yuji watches the sword begin to lose its light and disintegrate, symbolizing the death of Higuruma. Not giving our boy any time to mourn, Sukuna delivers a few strong punches to Yuji and kicks him away, before following up with 2 dismantle slashes that push him even further back. Staring at his regrown hand, Sukuna laments that although Higuruma died, Kamatoke was never returned to him. He also notes that Yuji's stomach, having been shredded into bits earlier by him using Cleave, has fully healed. Randomly appearing next to him, Sukuna then notices Kurara and Wee nearby. Seeing Wee wave a sheet over the trio, in the next instant, they vanish from sight and seemingly disappear from the battle, taking away Higuruma's body to safety. Unsurprised, Sukuna, just like myself, like we're so similar, surmises that Wee's teleportation curse technique was also used to retrieve Gojo's body earlier, and wonders if they are transporting the bodies to Shoko. Not fully convinced, he finds this unlikely, as reverse curse technique is less than half as effective if used on another person, and although her technique has always been fundamentally different from theirs, it's not on a similar power level. Glancing over, he knows that because of this, it means that in the last month alone, Yuji has managed to learn reverse curse technique himself. To Sukuna, it looks as if Yuji's ability to use curse energy to strengthen his body isn't the only thing that has improved. He ponders that he finally might be able to have a little fun with the brat. However, as he stands there, can't help but feel irritated by his presence. Spacing out, Sukuna wonders if he feels disappointed by Higuruma's death. The thought of needing someone else never crossed his mind. Reaffirming who he is though, he knows he eats what he wants and kills whoever he feels like, and if they happen to entertain him, it's a bonus. All this to him is just a way to pass time until his death, nothing else. Still, as he remembers the words he told Jogo, can't help but ponder why he now feels displeased when he sees others dedicated to an ideal, especially one which involves killing him. Those that all stand before him now are nothing but martyrs willing to die for their own ideals, and yet he can't get over this irritating feeling. Men of a similar stature challenged him and existed 1,000 years ago too, so he questions if that means it's not them. but him who's changed over the past millennium. Seeing Yuji in front of him now, and coming to realize that this brat is the crux of all of these emotions, he starts to think even more. Unlike the strangers he killed 1,000 years ago, whose exaggerated reasons and ideals were only conveyed to him through their dying words that he did not understand, Sukuna is deeply aware it's now different because of the time he was forced to coexist in Yuji's body. No matter how many damn times he breaks him or destroys his spirit, he gets back up because he possesses an indomitable ideal. The idea that someone weaker than him can rival him with nothing more than the willpower to achieve the ideals is what truly irritates Sukuna. His own capabilities were simply too great. He wasn't bound by ideals like others, and in fact, hated them. That's the sort of human he was. Skipping away just to my own thoughts and everything, I think that line there almost proves why Sukuna isn't even human anymore, or probably changed throughout the past at some point. It could have been when he incarnated and everything, who actually knows. Plus, he slightly did mention something about when he was human in the previous wall of text there as well. And because of that, I'm just going to say it, I think it's fairly obvious that Sukuna is most likely a vengeful spirit, or something along those lines. Bro's face looks like a half curse is growing out of it. Who knows, it's probably something more than just a vengeful spirit, but I think it's along those lines, and I like the idea at the moment. A bright light suddenly appears in the sky above Sukuna, and he simultaneously declares that he will take Yuji's ideals and mince them into nothing but dust. Darting in, a confused Kusakabe and Ino stare in confusion, wondering what the orb could be. Popping out, Yuji's Kogain then announces that another player has added a new rule to the culling game, Rule 15. Authority to begin the great merger between Tengen and humanity has been transferred to Megumi Fushiguro, or in simpler terms, Sukuna. Grabbing the orb of lights from in front of him and sucking it back, Kusakabe realizes that this likely means Yuta's surprise attack was successful and in turn activated this rule. Regardless of the sorcerer though, they always assumed that Sukuna wasn't the type to go through with Kenjaku's initial plan. However, Kusakabe now laments that his initial assumption of Sukuna being the obvious one to leave alive rather than Kenjaku due to him being the mental case has now proven wrong, and in that moment, Sukuna announces his plans to kill all of the sorcerers present, then the rest of the culling game players, and finally, the monster created from merging Tengen with mankind. Suddenly, the ground beneath Sukuna collapses, and the GOAT, Big Boy Yuta Akotsu, appears back on the scene, bursting through the rubble and apologizing for his late arrival. Immediately, Sukuna channels curse energy into his hand and goes to strike Yuta, but the special grade comfortably blocks it with his katana. Demanding that he put up a good fight now, Sukuna taunts him and declares that if he doesn't, everyone he wants to save will die. Beaming into reality, Rika appears and slams Sukuna into a nearby building with her hand while angrily asking who the hell he thinks he's talking to. Holding up her hand, the King of Curses smiles as he greets the Queen in all her overwhelming presence. Moments earlier, after Yuta snuck in and managed to catch Kenny by surprise, the latter declared that his will shall be inherited, as we know if you guys watched my Kenjaku vs Takaba video. Noticing a random shake from Suguru's headless body, Yuta quickly screams for Rika to emerge. Sadly, and like previous curse manipulators theorized, the beheading caused the body to lose control over curse spirit manipulation, thus releasing all of his absorbed curse spirits back into the world. As the swarm of curse spirits bursts out of the forest and rushes onto the bridge, Rika appears before them and begins to melt away their numbers. Up in the sky, a monolithic black mass attaches itself to Kenjaku, allowing him to request that his Kogain add a new rule to the culling game. Then, obviously, just as we saw over in the other colony, Kogain subsequently accepted and added the new rule. Hanging there, Kenjaku revealed that as a part of his backup plan, he had Sukuna undergo the ritual of succession. Now, all he needs to do is overwrite the originator of the merging ritual using the culling game as a basis to start the countdown to the merger. Examining the mass connected to Kenny though, Yuta notices a fetus-like creature inside an orb which he immediately guesses is most likely Tengen. In a flash, the thing quickly bursts out of the orb and flies towards Sukuna's location in Shinjuku. In response, Yuta immediately leapt at Kenjaku, finally killing the brain and bringing his body swapping to an immediate end. With a smile, Kenjaku admitted that while it didn't make up for his wasted century, he was glad that he got to fool around with Takaba in the end. He then told Yuta before he passed that it was their turn next, and he guarantees him that it will surely be interesting. Now returning to the damaged landscape of Shinjuku, Yuta and Rika stare down at the King of Curses. Seeing his hand begin to smoke, Yuta theorizes that Sukuna's reverse curse technique is returning, and now it's only a matter of time before he can also use his domain. Blaming himself for Higuruma's death and the failure of the plan, Yuta tries to convince himself that Rika was needed to deal with the release of the cursed spirits back at the bridge. In a flash, Yuta then vanishes, with Rika in combination obstructing most of Sukuna's vision with her body. In turn, this allows a hidden Yuta to thrust his katana through the curtain-like substance in an attempt to skewer the demon. Dodging out of the way of the sword, Sukuna easily grabs it, making Yuta realize that he's surrounding his body with miniature chainsaw-like slashes to avoid directly touching the blade. Releasing the katana, the duo then close in and attack Sukuna simultaneously. Fending off the cursed spirit with two of his hands, Sukuna is left open to a gut punch from Yuta, causing the mouth on his stomach to cringe with pain. Snatching back his blade out of Sukuna's grasp, Yuta then swings at him, who manages to quickly duck out of the way and catch sight of Rika wielding a freaking vending machine and rushing towards him. Blocking the unit as it's then thrown at him, Yuta tries to close in, but Sukuna also successfully blocks the strike from behind. Admitting that he is only making excuses for himself, Yuta wanted to be the one to defeat Kenjaku with his own hands, and because of that arduous decision, he created this situation. It's all his damn fault, and because of that, Yuta resolves to make up for his faults by activating his domain expansion, authenticity, and mutual love. Reacting to Yuta's domain of numerous swords that cover everything in sight, Sukuna immediately uses Hollow Wicker Basket, neutralizing the domain's sure hit effect. Snatching one of the blades from the ground and whipping his body towards Sukuna, Yuta goes to strike him, however he blocks with one of his arms. Spitting a crack appear on the blade, then Icebreaker suddenly activates, sending the King of Curses flying back. As the katana shatters into nothingness, Yuta vows with himself to finish everything here within his domain. Beginning to stand up and revealing that he was indeed struck in the head by Yuta's previous attack, Sukuna understands what it is their second plan is. Thanks to having incarnated in Megami's body, Sukuna knows that Yuta's innate technique is copy. So, in turn, they want to keep half of his mouths and arms busy, constantly having to keep up Hollow Wicker Baskets. Then, the big goat himself, Yuji, will dive in and deliver a strike that vibrates one's soul, and tears Megami from the abyss he currently dwells inside. Yuta's domain, authenticity, and mutual love allows him to imbue one of his copy techniques at random into the domain's barrier as its sure hit effect. Every other of his curse techniques are then randomly stored within the katanas in his domain's environment, which only he can access. Although a katana's curse technique is unknown until Yuta grasps it, and the sword disappears after the technique is released, the number of swords is unlimited during the length of the domain. Sending out Drew's technique, Yuta creates 3 miniature-like Shikigami that boost forward and encircle Sukuna. Meanwhile, Yuji closes in from behind and lands 2 punches on Sukuna. From above, Rika dives down and smashes the ground in front of him, forcing him to dodge by stepping back. Suddenly, the four-armed thing is then slashed on the back as he attempts to pass through the Shikigami's paths from earlier. Watching Yuta then hover in the air above him using Yuro's technique and beginning to start his next succession of attacks, he assesses his current condition. Due to his battle with Gojo, Sukuna is still unable to use his domain expansion, and the effects of his reverse curse technique are extremely weakened. In addition, his curse energy reserves are lowered to roughly the same as Yuji's, and having to constantly maintain Hollow Wicker Basket prevents him from unleashing his world-cutting dismantle. Kicking shit up a level though, Rika grabs Yuji and throws him at Sukuna, hitting probably close to Mach 11 speeds. At the same time, Yuta then closes in on Sukuna from the other side, launching a pincer attack in conjunction with Yuji. Throwing up his two spear hands, Sukuna blocks Yuji's kick and goes to grab down Yuta's blade. Glancing back at the brat, he makes note of the weirdities behind Yuji's strikes. From what he can tell, by applying the same principle that allowed him to directly damage Mahito's soul, Yuji is perceiving and striking at the boundary between Sukuna and Megami's soul. This allows him to slowly awaken the sleeping sorcerer's soul, which was pushed further into darkness during the bath, and in turn, this should interrupt the physical connection between Sukuna and Megami, thus decreasing Sukuna's overall curse energy output and the control over his body with each strike that Yuji lands on him. So right now he thinks that they'll just chip away at him until he can't maintain Hollow Wicker Basket, at which point the domain's sure hit effect will use Jacob's ladder to extinguish the cursed object inside of Megami. Swatting back, Sukuna then fends off Yuta's strikes and attempts to activate Cleave on Yuji. However, Yuta uses Curse Speech and orders him to not move, freezing Sukuna in place. Instantly swapping out his current blade, Yuta takes advantage of Sukuna's immobility and strikes him with Thin Icebreaker, blasting the King of Curses across the landscape of his domain and into a random pillar. Moments after he then catches his footing, Rika darts into his vicinity and smashes him down to the floor of Yuta's domain. Together, our MCs then rush in to try and capitalize on the situation. Having a moment to finally catch his breath though, Sukuna proceeds to aim one of his hands towards the sorcerers and fires a ranged dismantle at them, slashing the boys and driving them back. Trying to use this moment to her own advantage, Rika then dives in from above, only for Sukuna to grab her fist and start cutting the queen apart with Cleave. Sukuna notes that if he doesn't make contact with the boys, then it's just like with Ryu, although he doesn't expect they pass him in overall durability. It's not because he used a large amount of curse energy, it's just that all the ones who have shown up from Jujutsu High have had great defenses. Then there's obviously the broski himself. Yuji was somehow able to learn reverse curse technique in only a month, and Yuta was able to narrow the target of his domain expansion's sure hit effect to only him, which requires a highly advanced barrier technique. Laughing at them though, Sukuna asks what exactly they've all been up to over the past month. Yuji claims that it's all been hard work and determination, but Yuta cuts him off, saying that they simply cheated. In actuality, he knows that if it wasn't for the after effects of his battle with Gojo, then they probably wouldn't have even lasted a second in battle here. It pains him to admit it, but right now, they are up against the strongest sorcerer in history, and they need to stop him here. Initiating the next round, Rika and Yuji throw punches from each side, occupying Sukuna's arms. In a flash, Yuta draws blood with his katana before attaching a manga panel to Sukuna's chest using Charles' ability. Having fulfilled the conditions for ink, Yuta dodges a jab and lands a brutal blow to the King of Curses' head. As Rika and Yuji then continue their assault from each side, Sukuna lists out the 5 curse techniques he's seen Yuta use. He questions if he also possesses Limitless, but quickly dismisses the notion as the 6 sizes required to control Limitless. At the same time, Yuta theorizes that even Sukuna would be caught off guard by a technique that he hasn't seen yet. Picking up a katana and running forward, Yuta uses Oro's technique to manipulate the space around him and block Sukuna's view, before suddenly thrusting the sword through the distorted space in front of him. Like previously with Rika though, Sukuna catches the katana. However, in that moment, Yuta activates his new technique, Cleave. Serving Sukuna with a taste of his own medicine, slashes slowly begin to form on the King of Curses' surprised face as he realizes that Yuta copied his technique. Wondering how, or when he even had the opportunity to copy his ability, Yuta tells a confused Sukuna that the latter never managed to recover his last finger, did he? Rolling in over his right shoulder, Yuji socks Sukuna in the head. Swaying in and out of consciousness for a moment, Sukuna quickly figures that it was indeed Yuta who consumed his last finger. In a flash, Yuta then palms Sukuna's open chest, allowing Yuji to grab the head and knee him with extreme force. Whipping his own arm up around Yuji, Sukuna suddenly pulls him in close and activates a point-blank cleave on his chest. Despite his injuries, Yuji doesn't falter at all, and actually uses his coughed up blood to spit in Sukuna's face. Following back up, Yuta slips an uppercut through that absolutely rocks the chin of history's strongest sorcerer. Picking his beaten body off the floor, Yuji is certain that this is his chance. He will bring Sukuna down here and take Fushiguro back, right freaking now. No resting, instead he wills himself to heal and move to his feet once more. Somewhat daydreaming himself after the uppercut, Sukuna can feel that his curse energy output and control over his body are beginning to fade. All of a sudden, whipping the king's body towards the slowly standing Yuji, our boy absolutely pulverizes his face with a spinning handstand head kick. In that moment, the boys then notice something. Sukuna's fingers beginning to slip. In a desperate gamble to fire off his world-splitting dismantle, Sukuna releases his control over hollow wicker baskets. In a moment reminiscent of Hanami dropping his domain amplification, Rika, having anticipated this, restrains two of his arms while Yuji grabs a hold of the other one. Having closed in, Yuta then plunges his hand into the mouth of Sukuna's stomach and rips out his tongue. Simultaneously with his free hand, Sukuna cuts Yuta in the head with his mantle, sending him sliding back through his own domain. Unfazed with the cut, Yuta rushes back and is able to understand that Sukuna wasn't able to use this mantle while using hollow wicker baskets. Even if it's a simple technique, it is one that he has to use hand signs, chants, or even both. Slashing Sukuna across his face, Yuta vows to not let him do either. Throwing up Dismantle again to block the sorcerer's advance, Yuta is once again inflicted with multiple cuts. Still, he can tell that Sukuna's slashing attacks are slowly weakening. Not having anything to fear anymore, Yuta tells himself to close the gap and slash at Sukuna. Suddenly, Sukuna's face is then struck by the effect of Yuji's blood that he spattered him before, momentarily distracting him, allowing Yuta's previous strike to come in and cut off Sukuna's free hand. So, skipping back to the time everyone was discussing their plans on how they were going to separate Megumi from Sukuna, Yuji brought up some of Yuki's notes on souls. Apparently 2 souls will only mix to a certain degree but never become one. Chosu himself was curious as to if Yuji and Sukuna were different then. After all, he isn't able to feel a trace of the soul that formerly resided within him still in Yuji. Probably not understanding it entirely himself though, Yuji just thought that it was because there was such a massive difference in energy levels between a cursed object and a non-sorcerer. Generally speaking though, Yuji assumes that if Megumi is an exception like him, then they are probably in trouble. Continuing, he goes on to say that there was once a cursed spirit who was able to take the souls of others and manipulate them to a devastating degree. As long as a technique like this never reappears, Yuji thinks it's safe to assume that two souls cannot become one. Speaking up and pointing out that she might be of some use to them, Angel explains that her technique should be able to eradicate Sukuna due to his current incarnated form being a direct mix of his technique, his personality, and the cursed object inside of Megami. From what she knows, cursed techniques are connected to the brain, so a target's survival rate once hit by her technique is extremely low. However, if they are able to separate the two souls and weaken the bond between them, Megami's survival rate will rapidly increase. Returning to the domain, and with Sukuna unable to go anywhere due to Rika and Yuji, Yuta activates the sure hit effect of his domain expansion, Maximum Output, Jacob's Ladder, sending a large beam of light that beams down from the heavens above and engulfs the King of Curses. Darting in past Yuji, who had just let go of Sukuna's arm, Yuta renders Sukuna's arm once again useless, allowing his boy to power up his cursed energy and scream for Megami to wake the hell up. Connecting his punch with Sukuna's skull, Yuji senses something tell him that it's enough. When it comes to the composition of the soul, Yuji and Yuta had absolutely zero flaws in their plan. However, appearing in a shadowy abyss, Yuji watches Megami curled up in the fetal position say that he's had enough. Sadly for Megami, not a single feeling of wanting to live remained. His will had been extinguished. Scale of the Dragon. Recoil. Twin Meteors. In reality, Sukuna, having taken all this damage, still unleashes his world-cutting dismantle, slicing Yuta in half and shattering his domain expansion. Suddenly, Sukuna gasps, eyes stunned. To him, this was a strategy common of Jujutsu Sorcerers, a mediocre plan that, under normal circumstances, could have easily been avoided. Seeing the soul split katana sticking out of his chest, Sukuna looks back to see her, the one and only Maki, holding onto her blade, having successfully launched a surprise attack. So, during the same time that the boys, Yuji and Yuta, were stuck in battle with Sukuna, Kusakabe and Ino stood ready for the inevitable outside of the domain expansion. Informing his partner of the plan, Kusakabe tells Ino that once Yuta shatters a portion of his domain, Maki will rush in to attack Sukuna. Ino questioned if it was a better idea to send more people in, but Kusakabe rejected the idea as any additional fighters will alert Sukuna and spoil Maki's sneak attack. Landing like a ton of bricks beside them, Kusakabe looks over at Maki, preparing herself for the inevitable. Shattering into nothingness, Yuta's domain disappears, revealing that the sorcerer's best and worst case scenarios have indeed come into reality. As a grievously wounded Sukuna glances back at Maki, Rika, bawling her eyes out, boosts off, carrying her severely wounded partner towards Wee Wee. In a flash, the Shoda whips out his blankie and teleports the original MC to safety. I'm pretty sure these panels here are either half drawn, by the way. It might be a feature around how Maki perceives things. I don't know. To be honest, I just think it's the drawings and everything, and I'd love to know your thoughts either way down below. After gaining some distance from Maki, Sukuna realizes that it wasn't him who broke the domain. Instead, Yuta destroyed a portion as a signal and distraction for Maki to slide on in. He speculates that having no curse energy allowed her to pass through the barrier with no issue, whereas her curse tool, he's sure they must have placed it in the domain beforehand. Or, like Kusakabe was saying at the beginning of the chapter, which I never actually said, Yuta kind of moved his domain to a specific location, and I'm guessing that was probably where Maki's sword was, or where she'd put it. Feeling the gash in his chest slowly heal, Sukuna notes it's much slower than anything else he's received so far. As it turns out, a wound inflicted by the split soul katana from an individual capable of perceiving the soul usually cannot be healed by simply using reverse curse technique. This is for the reason that one would need to be aware of the outline of their own soul. Due to Sukuna having inhabited a body that contained two different souls, he was aware of the soul's outline in a similar way to how Yuji is. However, because he's been stuck in a battle for so long, the after effects of his previous injuries are making it near impossible for him to treat his wounds immediately. Over with Yuji, as he rushes in to fight Sukuna, he suddenly feels something wrong with him and drops to the floor. Coughing up blood, he questions what the hell is happening with him, but immediately comes to understand what it is. Even with having learned RCT, he's still taken 4 brutal strikes that would have killed him in the past. He knows it, but something inside of him hasn't completely healed. Appearing behind him, Choso comforts his younger brother and begins advising him on how to properly heal himself by imagining he is visualizing the outside of his body with his blood veins. Nearby, and now in battle with Sukuna herself, Maki dodges a slash from him and launches herself off the light pole. Appearing right in front of him like a streak of darkness, Maki slashes upwards. However, Sukuna jumps over the blade. Thrusting it forward, Sukuna grabs it and throws it to the side. Built like a brick shithouse though, Maki, don't budge. Instead, Sukuna is thrown to the ground and gets slashed back through the streets of Shinjuku into a bridge. Cutting apart the bridge with dismantle, Sukuna tosses the debris forwards onto Maki to distract her as he starts to whisper some sneaky incantations. Dodging every rock, like girl doesn't get hit by a single one. Maki then hears the curse chant and drops down, dodging the augmented flying slash at the last second. Standing there, Sukuna notes on how Maki can see his technique better than any other sorcerers, just like when he fought with Maharaga during Shibuya. Observing him herself, Maki theorizes that Sukuna is using curse energy to force his injured heart to beat while healing himself. With a fat grin, Maki taunts Sukuna, asking if he plans on fighting her while keeping that heart of his still beating. Grinning, the king just mentions that he doesn't see why not, he's hardly even tried so far. Meanwhile, over in a frost-covered part of Shinjuku, the Forgotten One, Hikari, and the Ice Queen Uraume continue their fights. Hikari knows the chick hasn't been trying to hide Sukuna from him, but the dude's presence is stupidly easy to read. Initially, Bro believed that after Sukuna regained his original form, they were fucked. Now though, he believes his allies will win against Sukuna. After all, his cursed energy is taking a massive nosedive. Uraume herself just finds Hikari's optimism absurd, remarking that Sukuna's curse energy wavers only if he's uninterested in his opponents. She ominously warns Hikari that he should feel ashamed for not offering a better fight than Gojo, because as of right now, Ryuman Sukuna has yet to reveal his true strength. So, back during earlier moments throughout the series, one of the sorcerers, not even sure who it is, probably Yuji, asked who the strongest first grade sorcerer was. Meimei assumed it was Kusakabe. Nanami thought it mostly depended on the situation. Still, he also believed it had to be Kusakabe. Gojo immediately said it was Kusakabe, but brought up how it'd be a different situation if the big three families were brought into the conversation. Kusakabe though, ever the man to try and downplay himself, replied that it had to be someone other than himself or Usami. And who the hell even is Usami at this point? I can't remember. Flashing back into Shinjuku, Maki then leaps over another of Sukuna's slashes and attacks him with her blade. Insanely enough, the dodge dismantle slash cuts in half a nearby skyscraper that begins to fall onto the sorcerers below. Smashing onto the road, cars and pieces of rubble are thrown up. Seizing the opportunity as a car slides between them, Sukuna launches a slash at Maki, who manages to block it, but is thrown at insane speeds from its force into a nearby building. Reappearing behind Maki as she smashes through the walls of the office, Sukuna grabs and goes to activate a point-blank cleave on her chest. Noticing someone behind him though, Sukuna throws up his hand and sends these slashes in Ino's direction instead of Maki's. Whipping his legs forward, he then stomps on the sorcerer, causing Ino to cough up blood and fall backwards out of the building defeated. Instantly realizing that the sorcerer wasn't holding the same weapon as before, Kusakabe, from above, then swings down, smashing the floor and connecting with a blocking Sukuna. Disappointed because, obviously he can see that Sukuna somehow saw through his plans, Kusakabe is then tossed to the side as Maki, travelling at body-altering speeds, blasts Sukuna through the wall behind him. Changing directions immediately, she jumps up and launches him with a sonic blow that smashes him into another of the room's pillars. Slashing all of the remaining pillars in the room, Maki knows that she has to end it here. Even if they do save Yuta, if the fight goes on, it will put them in all kinds of troubles. Hajime Kashimo, Hiromi Higuruma, and Yuta Akotsu. Following the death of Gojo, all those that represented the peak of strength stood before Sukuna, bearing their own fangs. Even still, they amounted to nothing more than a simple starter. The one who has truly roused his hunger was her, Maki Zenin, the one who had abandoned Jujutsu sorcery by means of a heavenly restriction as the only other person to have made Sukuna feel this excited for battle. Kicking out every cut pillar in an attempt to drop the building on him, Sukuna vanishes from sight. All of a sudden, he grabs Maki by the face and activates a point-blank cleave, slicing apart the building and brutally cutting the left side of Maki's face. Unlike Yuji, Sukuna can tell that Maki has shaved away everything until nothing but pure emptiness remains. Looking at each other, Sukuna screams that at its very core, sorcery is skin and flesh. Yet, somehow Maki, with a body of marrow and bone, seems to deny the very existence of what it means to be a sorcerer. Blocking a thundering strike from Maki, he continues that sorcery or bone. The outcome of this current bout will prove what is truly worth developing. Surprised, Maki sees that Sukuna stopped his reverse curse technique and isn't even healing himself anymore. Grabbing a hold of her blade and powering up his fist though, Sukuna announces that, well, this is a first. She is the only one who has ever forced him to use this. Throwing his fist into Maki's stomach, Sukuna lands a brutal black flash that reverberates throughout our girl's core and sends her shooting off the overpass. Watching from a hole in a nearby building, Kusakabe can't believe what he's seeing. He's the only one left. He can't tell where Yuji or Choso is, and he knows for goddamn sure Mei isn't going to help now. To be honest, he was just planning on running once it was obvious they had no chance. Now that they've come this far though, he thinks that he has no other choice. Looking down at the cursed freak, he questions if this is really about to happen. Kusakabe versus Sukuna. Not hesitating, Kusakabe enters his new shadow style Simple Domain stance using the Evening Moon sword drawing technique. Watching this, Sukuna questioned why he'd used that technique on a flying slash type ability. As an anti-domain and anti-barrier technique, a simple domain is able to negate a sure hit effect, but not the curse technique itself. Watching the king's hand flick forth in preparation to let his slashes loose, Kusakabe knows that within his simple domain, his curse energy output will get a boost, whereas the power of Sukuna's abilities will weaken, but not completely neutralize. Seeing a few slashes appear right in front of him, Kusakabe blocks them and notes that due to how he can incorporate his own body programming into the simple domain, it allows him to intercept anything that enters the area immediately. He thinks that it'll be interesting since he can more or less read Sukuna's slashes by focusing on his movements or curse energy sparks. Throwing up his blade, Kusakabe suddenly blocks another attack, which in turn continues on to cut up the bridge railing behind him. Rattled by the surprise attack, Bro knows it's because he activated his technique without even flinching. Speaking up, Sukuna then asked if he knew what was about to happen. Sweating, Kusakabe easily deduced that he plans on releasing a world-splitting dismantle. So, remember how they were talking about Kusakabe's strength previously, just a chapter or so back? Well, continuing on with that convo, Mei said that in terms of raw strength, she would put herself or Nanami above him. Nanami wouldn't say he can visualize Kusakabe winning a bout, it's more that he just finds it so hard to imagine him losing. Not only has Kusakabe mastered the sword, but he has an abundance of technique variations. He's capable of utilizing barrier techniques and has an almost infinite knowledge of Jujutsu, which serves as a base for his greatest strength, his analytical ability and power of reasoning. One would almost compare him to a handy Swiss Army knife, the type of sorcerer you would wish to accompany you to a deserted island. Getting another cameo now, Gojo then appears. Like, bloody Gojo and Nanami at this point are getting more screen time in the afterlife than freaking Hikari versus Uraume is. But either way, he comments on how Kusakabe's simple domain is an ace in the hole in its own right, since he doesn't need to make a binding vow to use it. On top of that, what blows the bondage boy away more is the manipulation he has over it and the range he can extend it out to. Back in Shinjuku, Kusakabe blows up the range of his simple domain, stunning Sukuna and stopping him from charging up his cursed energy or expanding his cursed technique's target. So, interestingly enough, the new Shadow Sword draw is, at its core, a counter technique used to draw in the opponent. When it comes to Kusakabe though, he's just so freaking broken that he can bring his opponent to him by expanding the overall range of his simple domain. In Jujutsu Sorcery, an individual capable of achieving grade 1 with no curse technique attacks not with their brain, but their spine. They think outside the box at all times and are never to be taken lightly. Unleashing his blade, Kusakabe launches a flurry of insanely fast and direct slashes that cut away at the King of Curses. Noticing that his sword is snapped, Kusakabe whips off his overcoat, distracting Sukuna and allowing him to land a brutal set of punches. Slashing his coat in half, Sukuna can only watch as Kusakabe kicks him with a fat head kick and sends him shooting through a set of overpassing bridges. Catching up to him, Kusakabe leaps into the air and strikes Sukuna with a plethora of chest hits. Questioning what the hell he's up to, bro knows that he'd never usually try this damn hard. Deducing that it's because he still owes Big Yaga one more favor, he stops himself and points out that he's not even here anymore. So maybe it's more or less because of that exact reason. If he were alive, Kusakabe doubts Yaga would ridicule him if he avoided putting his life on the line and didn't fight. He'd never stop him from seeing his little sister and Takeru either. However, if he did find out he left, he might look a little sad. Not because he didn't put his life on the line, but because they wouldn't be able to fight by each other's side. Mei, Gojo, and Nanami all say that this is exactly why they all pick Kusakabe as the strongest grade 1 sorcerer. Despite constantly complaining about everything he does, not a single person can deny his intellectual integrity. Bringing the question regarding the strongest grade 1 to an end, Gojo, Nanami, and Mei say that it's all because he's a kind person. Floating above in the streets of Shinjuku, like the honored one of tax evasion, Kusakabe tells himself it isn't time to be overthinking. If he dies here, Sukuna will kill Miwa and all of the other remaining players. Landing back in front of the king and snatching his broken blade from the ground, he knows he needs to fight with his life on the line, just like everyone else so far. Pointing the broken blade at him, he asks himself what kind of adult he'd be if he didn't charge towards his death for those younger than him. Activating the new shadow style Moonlight Veil technique, Kusakabe applies curse energy to the broken blade and stabs the King of Curses with it. With a smile, Sukuna notes how aiming for his heart was a good idea. However, having caught the blade with his hand, he says it was so damn obvious though. KY man. Moments later, we see Kusakabe having collapsed onto the floor with 2 massive slashes covering his chest. Running over, Wee Wee whips out his blankie and prepares to teleport him when all of a sudden, Sukuna appears right behind him. Calling him bothersome, the king goes to wipe his ass from existence when suddenly Wee Wee and Kusakabe vanish. Looking up from the sidewalk, Sukuna jokes at how tedious these new faces are becoming. Oops, cause bro is actually him. Miguel asks if he's dumb or something. Assuming his pale ass doesn't get out of his house much, Miguel jokes that the Japanese really ought to expand their horizons. Appearing next to Miguel and holding on to Kusakabe with his random extra hand, Uraume also joins the battle. Skipping back to Africa, probably in the months before the Shinjuku Showdown commenced, Miguel refused to take part. To him, there is no way he'd fight against an opponent that might even overpower someone like Gojo. That goes beyond the realm of monsters, and he can't believe they'd expect him to do something like that. Uraume, who actually came with Yuta to convince him, argues that he'd simply need to come in for the cleanup after Sukuna is tuckered out from fighting Gojo. Still, Miguel finds the idea of Sukuna getting to such a state almost laughable. Yuta interjects, pointing out that the fallout from the mass merger with Tengen won't just stop at the Japanese borders. However, Miguel says whatever happens as a result of the merger is still preferable to fighting Sukuna. Lacking, he then asks if these silly old Japanese think high-spirited black people will just survive anything. It ain't like that, and bro reiterates that he's got to look out for his own boys at the end of the day. Uraume says he never thought of Miguel as jovial, but Miguel continues on by pointing out that Gojo should be the one here, bowing down before him and begging for him to join. After all, the Japanese are known to be polite. Annoyed, Yuta offers himself up for prostration instead, causing Miguel to jokingly shake in his chair and ask if he struck a nerve. Stepping in, Uraume asks Yuta to give him some privacy and just let the two of them talk for a moment. Having sat down together, Miguel asks what it is he's going to do, replying that all he wanted was the same as him, to make Suguru Geto king. Agreeing that he followed along because it was Geto, Miguel over time thinks he paid his dues by babysitting Yuta, meaning that he really doesn't have any reason left to care for Japan. Uraume brings up how they all loved Suguru, him, Miguel, Mimiko, Nanako, Minami, Toshisha, everyone, questioning if Uraume's saying he should take revenge for what happened in Shibuya. Uraume replies no, instead answering that it's about mourning them all together, the same way people would usually visit a grave to bid farewell. They'll instead blast a freaking requiem to the heavens by giving this fight their all. Pointing out that surely he means hell, Miguel mentions that if he does join, he has a few conditions. He doesn't want to just die and fight a domain user, so will only fight after Gojo and Yuta have both lost and Sukuna's domain expansion is fried. Hearing bro use we though, Uraume questions if he's fighting too, to which Miguel, slapping his bald ass head, says the more boys, all the better to lay Sukuna out with. Looking down on Sukuna and Shinjuku now, Miguel and Uraume confirm between themselves that Sukuna's domain is sealed, plus, on top of that, his reverse curse technique is severely weakened. He's missing his lower left arm, and the right is in a similar situation. Most of all though, he still has an unhealed heart. Smiling, Miguel feels bad. After all of the others saved them the most delicious part of the fight. Suddenly, the building they're standing on begins collapsing, causing Uraume to jump down in front of Sukuna. Thrusting his hand forth, Uraume's giant appendage catches a hold of and slams Sukuna back into an opposing building, shattering it. Seeing his hand then suddenly get slashed down the middle with Dismantle, Miguel dashes in front of his boy and starts freaking styling on Sukuna's ass. Using the momentum from dropping down low and spinning around on his hands, Miguel effortlessly dodges Dismantle slashes, straight kicks and punches from Sukuna, all while Uraume is thrown around in the background, barely dodging the after effects of their attacks. A new technique that I'll definitely have to add to my techniques video after the series finishes, Uraume's technique Heart Catch, is one that can grip the technique's target. Even if destroyed, this illusionary hand can be recreated an indefinite amount of times, with only 1/10 of the damage being transferred back to the user. Sukuna doesn't personally think Uraume's curse technique is relatively interesting, and more or less guesses that if one of them does have something in store, it'll be Miguel. Miguel Odal's curse technique is called Hakuna Lana, possibly meaning no curses if we're following the same path as Hakuna Matata, which means no worries, but I don't actually even have a clue. Following that line even more though, the technique etched into his body is one that expels curses and enhances their own physical capabilities. It's almost like creating a bunch of buffs and debuffs without the use of a domain. Gojo personally doesn't think it's a scary domain, but has always considered it useful. While they were over in Africa first meeting up with Miguel, he added that 99% of all sorcerers are Japanese. Add a curse energy buff to a hulked up brother whose bodies are already extremely rare in Japan, and the results are terrifying. Having overheard what Creams was going on about, Miguel tells him that he's been hella racist. He's special because he's him, and not because of the colour of his skin. Moving past Gege spitting facts for a moment there through Miguel, Yuta asks if Gojo's use of the word frightening also applies to him. Not exactly sure if he can make sense of this, Gojo says that if he and Miguel fought bare knuckles with no curse techniques and only curse energy enhancements, he'd win the marathon, but Miguel would crush on the sprint. Returning to a stunned Sukuna, Miguel parries his 2 remaining good hands and lands a brutal strike on the already wounded chest. Choso, like a demon of darkness, appears behind Sukuna and shoots a piercing blood that the king just manages to evade. Picking up, like dude's actually head glitching here, Sukuna throws 2 slashes that force Choso back, but bro still manages to block them. Raining down from the glass ceiling, Yuji Itadori lands a floor-shattering 2-handed hammer fist that forces Sukuna down to his knees. As Sukuna laughs, seeing Yuji again, we learn that the world-severing dismantle must be activated with the same hand signs used for Malevolent Shrine, called Enmiten. Due to Sukuna only having the 1 free hand before his transformation, he was forced to impose a binding vow to the activation conditions for all preceding uses of the slash in order to originally cut Gojo. In the present now, and on top of this Enmiten hand signs and chants being needed, the accuracy of the technique has to be directed with his hand. In a violent flash, the 2 left arms of Sukuna are suddenly sliced off. Stunned because he didn't actually expect her to return, and even after eating a black flash, she, Maki, still lives and has returned to the fight. Boosting in, Yuji knows his twin can't complete hand signs with only 1, and his reverse curse technique isn't working at all. He thinks maybe, since it's all coming together and everyone's hard work is finally paying off, they can win. However, at that moment, Sukuna, like pro is actually feeling himself, lands a second black flash on Uraume. For those confused as to why this is devastating for everyone, well, after Gojo landed his second black flash, he managed to restore his lost curse energy. This here is now the exact same case with the King of Curses. Skipping away though to another freaking Gojo cameo, like the screen time he's getting right now is imposterous. Either way, he's now seen teaching the youngins about why he can't just unleash a black flash whenever he wants. Like, he's got the 6 eyes, so surely he could. According to the textbooks though, a black flash is a distortion of space between the fist and cursed energy that strikes real damn quick, like we've all been over the explanation before. Gojo though finds that the definition given was too vague, and the technique itself is influenced by a number of factors. For one, if he loaded up his fist with cursed energy and threw a punch, 3 outcomes could occur. 1. Their fist is strengthened. 2. The cursed energy crashes into his opponent. Or the third, a mix of the previous 2. Timing isn't the only determining factor. It is a toss-up depending on the blend of the environment, the user's physical condition, the opponent's cursed energy, and even humidity and air temperature. To put it simply, there is no correct answer to unleashing a black flash. For Gojo and pretty much anyone else, it comes down to complete luck of the draw. This is why a grade 1 like the GOAT Nanami had a higher consecutive black flash record than Gojo. That being said though, the power difference between them is still large. Gojo's output is higher and he takes opponents out quickly, so it makes landing consecutive black flashes almost impossible for him. Back in Shinjuku now, all of the sorcerers begin analysing the current situation. Including the black flash landed on Maki, Sukuna has landed 2 so far. They all also assume he might have regained his curse energy output like Gojo and is about to pick the momentum back up once more. Simultaneously, everyone then launches a combined attack. Choso kicks up a railing, allowing Yuji to grab a hold of it and slam it into the wall behind Sukuna, trapping him there. Immediately leaping above him, Choso fires a point-blank supernova that the king somehow manages to avoid. Boosting through the stores next to him, Maki, who was tracking him, bursts through the glass entrance and attempted to stab the demon through the chest once more. Catching her blade, the two exchange a flurry of quick blows, stunning Choso with how they're using the air as footing in itself. Smiling and warping up his curse energy, Sukuna hits Maki with his 3rd black flash, sending her crashing back through a building severely injured. Flicking his hand forth, Sukuna turns his attention towards Choso, who unleashes a volley of supernova attacks. Suddenly, a slash cuts through the smoke on its way towards Choso. Boosting past his own slash and grabbing a hold of Choso, the demon whips his hybrid ass into the wall behind him. Throwing up his hands, afraid of the inevitable, Choso is struck in the chest by Sukuna's 4th black flash, absolutely destroying the wall behind him. Not done though, big bro Choso grabs his arm and has his blood harden around Sukuna's hand, trapping him. Socking Sukuna's cursed face with one of his trusty right hooks, Yuji sends him sliding away from his older broski. Gassed up, Choso knows that no matter how strong Sukuna is, Yuji's blows will weaken him and cause him to lose control of his body. Close by and picking up his boy, Miguel told him that it was time to dip, but LaRue refused as he believed there was still more he could do here. Bursting through the entrance of a store, Sukuna delivers a gut punch to Yuji, blowing out the right side of his torso. Grabbing the brat by his collar, Yuji somehow quickly switches things up and pulls Sukuna in close before leaning back and aiming up a point-blank piercing blood on the demon's head. Laying in a heap of rubble, Choso was aware Yuji is currently unable to use conversions effectively, making his shots inaccurate. Screaming out the words needed for piercing blood, Yuji headshots the left side of Sukuna's face, who in turn throws up his hand and slashes Yuji's shoulder, pushing him back. Immediately getting to his damn feet, Yuji sends curse energy into his fist, preparing for his next strike. With a few feet gap between them, Sukuna, in a similar moment to Mahito, sensing the inevitable, felt the same premonition of an incoming black flash. Randomly then having his eyes change to hearts, what truly caught him off guard and forced Sukuna to look in the other direction was LaRue using his curse technique. Screaming out that it isn't just bodies he can grab with Heart Clutch, LaRue elaborates on how once they've got a hold of someone, they can even grab their heart. Stunned and with his attention completely diverted, our GOAT, the MC, showed that freak up. Within the next 0.0001 fractions of a second, Yuji unleashed a huge black flash that connected with Sukuna's previous wound, cracking the entire structure behind him and sending black sparks flashing off in every direction. The one who unleashed his true potential with a single blow beneath the scattering sparks of a black flash was him, an awakened Yuji Itadori. So skipping back to an earlier moment in the series, and initially after running away from Yuji and Maki, Uraume atop a building asked who Yuji Itadori actually is. Sukuna explains that as far as he knows, he's Kenny's creation. As for his lineage, he doesn't exactly know. Uraume points out how they felt a similar vibe coming off Yuji. She laughed in his face, but it was a vibe that was obviously not from the time Sukuna spent inside of him. Guessing that it's likely Kenjaku's thing, Meguna knows he wouldn't create a kid for no reason. It's likely that during his time in Kaori's body, Kenny slept with Sukuna's reincarnation, Jin Itadori, someone who he guesses has an identical soul to his own. Which is freaking insane just to think about that for a second. Continuing with the series changing bombs here, Sukuna elaborates on how when he was in the womb, he consumed his twin brother because he was starving to death. In turn, it caused his twin soul to wander until it reached Kenjaku as Jin Itadori, with whom Kenny created Yuji. Technically, as we already know, Yuji is a player of the culling game because of the fingers sealed within him. Sukuna assumed that it was possibly a necessary step to ensure his strength as a host. Understanding what he's actually saying now, Uraume thinks that if this is true, then that means Yuji Itadori has latent potential equivalent to Ryuman Sukuna. Flashing back to Shinjuku as the two stand opposite each other, preparing to fight, Sukuna makes the first move. Throwing his hand forth, he cuts Yuji's face. However, our boy does not stop. Instead, he parries Sukuna's hand and lands his second black flash. Again, he snaps his other hand forth and lands a third consecutive black flash at Sukuna. Falling backwards through the inside of the building now, Yuji then grabs a pillar and creates these random scissor markings on it. Currently in the series, Big Yuji has two different curse techniques. Blood manipulation, which was engraved within him after absorbing the remaining cursed womb death paintings, and a new one, just gained after achieving the awakened state brought on by the sparks from the black flash. Slicing the pillar from the wall, Yuji gains the shrine that had been engraved into his core as the reincarnated body of Ryuman Sukuna. Throwing the pillar at Sukuna, the demon slices it into smaller squares and goes to kick at Yuji. Snatching his foot out of the sky from in front of him, Yuji tries to activate Cleave on his leg, but only cuts the surface. Seeing Yuji then proceeding to throw a punch, Sukuna sends 3 point-blank slices that throw a boy's head to the side. Instantly whipping his head back though, and throwing his fist into Sukuna's ribs, Yuji lands his 4th consecutive black flash. Having gained some distance now, Sukuna in all of his wise years knows that the men from era to era may change slightly. But what the actual frick even is this? Luckily for him at this moment, Yuji has only just learned the technique, so its output is extremely weak. Still, it's not even that worries him. It's Yuji's extremely keen sense in battle. Flashing back to the moment Gojo told Ino that if he wanted to use the curse tool Nanami left behind, he didn't need to ask them. Ino knows it, he just understands that they've all known Nanami for longer than him and are his oldest friends. However, they reassured him that Nanami trusted Ino more than anyone else. Back to the present, Ino activates Auspicious Beast Summon number 4, summoning a massive dragon that slams the king into the wall behind him. Watching his beast get cut up all around him though, Ino tries to attack Sukuna with the blunt sword. However, Sukuna just stomps on it, trapping Ino in place. Noticing something, Ino then fakes out Sukuna, allowing Yuji to appear behind him and land his 5th consecutive black flash. Reeling from the hits as he slides back, Sukuna is just like, what the fuck? How the hell is this even possible? How can he use black flash this many times? Laying on the ground, probably thankful for his life, Ino apologized to Nanami for not being of any help at all. Looking up and seeing Yuji jumping down to his level, Sukuna tries to punch him, but the boy grabs his arm and punches him back into the wall, destroying it. Attacking him with a flurry of slashes, Sukuna is baffled to see that Yuji isn't even being affected by techniques that use a mix of impact hits and slashing attacks. Closing in on him through the sea of slashes, Yuji pummels Sukuna with his 6th use of a black flash. Instantly reaching back, Sukuna manages to grab and activate a point-blank cleave on Yuji's head. Still not defeated, and with the left half of his freaking face seemingly blinded from the slashes, Yuji throws forth his 7th black flash, connecting with Sukuna's surprised head and knocking him back. Snapping back and screaming that he's just a brat, Sukuna is taken by surprise once again as Nanami's blunt sword connects with his dumbass head. Turns out, Ino, from like a nearby window, in a last-ditch effort to make an impact in the battle, threw the sword and dazed Sukuna at the perfect time, allowing our boy Yuji to prepare for his next blow. Telling Yuji to lay his ass out, our boy, just like Gojo, then hits him with a back shot so damn hard that it turns into his freaking 8th consecutive black flash. At this exact moment, Yuji Itadori was like a king, but superior. So, back during his part of the battle against Sukuna, Gojo had, like Yuji, awakened and achieved a unique reverse curse technique due to the 2 black flashes. In turn, he redistributed its usage to different areas of his brain, relieving the stress placed on him and allowing him to regain the reverse curse technique which had been previously lost. Looking down on Yuji below him, it's evident that it should be the same for the King of Curses, Uraume Sukuna. He should be able to regenerate his arms and fix himself up, but due to our boy coming through clutch and landing 7 black flashes that struck at the soul's border between him and Megami, it's resulted in Sukuna completely losing the chance to activate his reverse curse technique. Elsewhere, atop a building, Big L tells his boy that he put in a solid shift. Now though, he hopes that God has mercy on him in his next path. Coughing up and mentioning that he isn't even freaking dead yet, Miguel's attention is quickly torn away from Uraume as he sees the explosion of someone's aura. Questioning that this has to be a joke, we boost back to the fight to see that Sukuna, alongside these sparks of black, he's regained his domain expansion, the Malevolent Shrine. For those wondering why or what's up with this completely new center for his domain, to be honest, I don't even know. Plus, here we can like almost see the outline of his barrier, which is crazy as well because, you know, bro has a barrierless domain. To be honest, and I'm just assuming that it has something to do with Sukuna having to alter his hand signs to compensate for those destroyed ones. Apparently, by actually changing those hand signs and using a specific part of his brain that was unaffected by the Infinite Void, Sukuna was able to activate his curse technique alongside his barrier. Amidst a sea of uncertainties and impromptu binding vows, Uraume Sukuna, after his rush of black flashes, was able to recreate the Malevolent Shrine without loss in the overall radius or the potency behind its slashes. So skipping back now to the preparation for this battle, Hikari pointed out, as we all know, that both reverse curse techniques and domain expansions are vital to their upcoming operation. Speaking up, Aki lets him know that it's absolutely useless to her, annoying Hikari, who obviously wasn't even talking to her about reverse curse technique. When it comes to Yuji and Choso though, Big Bro mentions that he may have a way where he and Yuji could figure it out. Wondering exactly how all of the others regenerate their bodies with reverse curse technique, Choso inquires how they compensate for their lost blood. Hikari and Yuta both replied that it's more or less off instinct. However, Shoko says that she converts her curse energy into blood. As we know in Jujutsu Kaisen, there are a ton of people who can use reverse curse technique but can't heal anyone themselves. One fundamental reason for this is the difference in usage. Another reason can also be the body of the target refusing to be healed. Throughout the world of Jujutsu, there are just countless cases where the curse energy of the one healing rejects the process, and almost as many where the curse energy of the one being healed doesn't respond to the conversion. Hence why when it comes to Shoko herself, it's more or less a case by case thing when it comes to the effectiveness of her healing. Having actually thought that himself as well, Choso elaborates that his body allows him to convert curse energy into blood. This actually helps him a lot with overcoming the initial hurdle of learning reverse curse technique. In turn, if Yuji sucks up a few of his brothers, he should technically gain a body capable of that as well, alongside a few extra techniques, as we've seen so far. Plus, that ain't all. According to Choso, their bodies allow them to compensate for the technical aspects of reverse curse technique. This means that the main limiting factor behind the reverse curse technique is immense curse energy, which Choso doesn't really think applies to them at all, because, they're both stocked up with a lot of freaking curse energy. With this all said, Big Bro asks that he has someone switch with his current partner so he can learn off someone who actually uses reverse curse technique. Standing there, just kind of confused with what's going on, Yuji listens as Wee Wee butts in and explains how his technique is the teleportation of targets. If he is with someone, he can easily transport them to a place or person he's previously marked. How he does this is by breaking down the body and soul into two separate entities, then using the body as a box to transport its contents. However, if he has the permission of the individual, the box's contents can be taken. Or, in short, because that's kind of confusing, Lil Bro is able to swap the souls of two marked individuals if they give him permission. Wondering what's up with Yuji, he says that it just reminds him of the body manipulation abilities Mahito used to have. Curious and probably kind of freaked out, he wonders if the shape of the person's body and soul could be stretched if they swap. Letting him know that it isn't an issue at all and he doesn't actually need to worry, Wee Wee says he can swap the contents without the boxes ever opening. Pretty much saying that he doesn't need to worry about the soul being manipulated. Plus, on top of this, no one is actually able to tell whether or not the contents of an unopened box have ever been tampered with. Pointing out that Yuji's growth as a sorcerer has been insane, Kusakabe asks him if he knows why. Joking that it has to be his innate talent, Kusakabe kills the vibe by letting him know that it was his uncle. Obviously he doesn't know it's his uncle yet. Like in a sport, if he does certain moves over and over again, it'll sort of become a muscle memory. Since Sukuna operated his technique in Yuji's body, it means his cells likely remember the extreme special grade Jujutsu. Letting him know that they're going to be doing the same practice with switch training, Kusakabe says that he will first switch with Yuji. Once in control, he will hammer his curse energy manipulation and a foundation barrier, the simple domain, into his very core. Curious, because Hikari was almost certain there was a binding vow preventing people from learning the technique outside of the Shadow School. Mei with a devious grin on her face tells him he doesn't need to worry as she's taking care of the situation. Which is what the freak did she do? Did she just murk the person who made the vow or something? I don't know, I have no clue. This also makes me question as well if someone else could learn a domain through Wee Wee's soul swapping abilities, as in they go into someone who knows a domain, they do a domain in that person's body. I don't know, you know what I'm saying. Anyways. Back in the domain, Yuji immediately activates new shadow style, simple domain. Staring forth and seeing the black amalgamation of curse energy and innate thought merged together, Yuji can tell that the domain isn't complete. If he can just endure this, he's sure there has to be some sort of opening. Seeing Sukuna still proudly holding up his gang signs, we find that Yuji did indeed correctly analyze the situation. Maintaining the highest degree of difficulty, even at the 11th hour, Sukuna sent slashes flying throughout his barrier on a scale just as large as in Shibuya. To do this, he actually created his expansion in an outer shelled barrier. From this, the original binding valve that allowed an escape route has now vanished, and it not only resulted in an even tighter range with his techniques, but also changed the complete workings of his domain. Now, within his materialized realm, his sure hit effect will activate. If his domain was activated even slightly differently, it most likely wouldn't have worked, as Maki, who's invisible to cursed energy, wouldn't have been able to escape. However, due to the absolutely beaten state he's currently in, it's frankly impossible for him to maintain a high level domain for an extended period of time. Thinking on the spot, Yuji guesses that it's probably going to take 90 seconds, meaning that in just 90 seconds, Malevolent Shrine will collapse, and if they can survive, they can finally win. Pleading with themselves to just bear it all for a moment longer, everyone fends off the sea of slashes, with Maki being assisted by freaking Miwa, who I never expected to make a reappearance. Like, my apologies on that there for the shade I gave her like 2 chapters ago. Unable to keep up his reverse curse technique though, Yuji is hit by a flurry of brutal slashes that cut his leg off and send him tumbling backwards. Snapping back to his feet moments later, confused, he wonders why. Why did the slashes stop? Did they truly endure the full 90 seconds? Furnace. Open. In front of Yuji though, Sukuna opens his infamous black box called the Furnace and begins to ready up his most lethal ability yet. Questioning if he's being serious or not, we find ourselves back during that month or so of training before all of these sorcerers started their bouts against Sukuna. Yuji reveals that his substitution training ended up being with both Yuta and, as we know, Kusakabe. However, with there only being a month or so before the battle, he asked Choso for any tips on how to use blood manipulation. Asking if Yuji knows about the convergence trick, Bro wonders if it's the one where you make it feel like you're weeing yourself. Popping in, Noritoshi says that it's the basis of how blood manipulation even works. It's a similar sensation to when you immerse your entire body in hot water and the heat gradually spreads throughout. He says that one needs to imagine the blood vessels expanding and creating the silhouettes of the body like heat. Noritoshi also mentions that convergence is a technique that compresses blood, so it's probably a good idea for Yuji to develop the sensation of holding larger objects in his hands. Personally, he thinks that with aluminium cans and clay appendages, these are probably the greatest options to learn with. A bit saddened, Choso thinks that it's actually a bit better for Yuji to have a basic understanding of how to stop bleeding first. After all, the blood manipulation technique will only be a basic medical treatment that will relieve pain without actually targeting the cause itself. I just realized I was reading freaking backwards for no reason. Either way, just before leaving here, Noritoshi finishes his explanation, causing Choso to scream out for Yuji to ask him about Supernova and how it works. Which is honestly just crack up, because it's a technique that Kashimo doesn't even have, and Choso just wants to help his little bro out in some sort of way here. Skipping back to Shinjuku though, as the flames burst out of his hand, we find that only after going through the preparation with Dismantle and Cleave will the doors of the hearth finally open. These flames have no speed in contrast to their firepower. To solve this, Sukuna had initially imposed a binding vow on himself. This was that the execution of the hearth would be forbidden in the case of an overwhelming numbers of sorcerers against Sukuna, except within a domain expansion. Due to this said binding vow, all substances that have been turned into dust by the expansion of Sukuna's domain acquire an explosive curse energy equal to that inside of the hearth. On top of this, Sukuna has temporarily changed the specifications of the barrier, limiting the entry and exit of living beings, keeping the area of his domain hermetically sealed without reducing its overall curse energy outputs. By the way, for those of you that are confused on what the hell hermetically even means, it just means airtight seal. I could have probably said that in the sentence, but I'm hella interested in what you guys might think, as I'm pretty sure it's kind of hard to have an airtight seal on a barrier with a barrierless domain. But maybe I'm just tripping right now and that's just me. Either way, as Uraume, now taking on Gojo's odd win stance, tells Akari that victory is almost confirmed, we fly over to Yuji as he watches a large fire arrow unleash its terrifying power. The dust that was once there has now been transformed into a thermobaric explosive cloud that spreads rapidly to all corners of Sukuna's domain. As the fiery mass obliterates all around, we learn that due to the heat of Sukuna's stove or furnace or hearth or whatever the hell we're calling it this week, a high temperature shockwave with an instantaneous and explosive transition combined with the decompression and supercompression leads to the complete and utter death of all living beings within Sukuna's domain. This here is the final secret technique of the King of Curses, Uraume Sukuna. This is the exact same technique he actually used against Maharaga to annihilate him with one blow during Shibuya. Earlier on in the fight against Gojo, due to the changes that were made on creating Sukuna's barrier technique and the constant reductions in the area of effect, Sukuna had sealed away the hearth because he couldn't manifest its full power. Screaming out his younger brother's name, Yuji looks up to all of a sudden see Choso standing over him. Throwing out his hands, Yuji feels the constantly twisting wall of Choso's blood manipulation all around him. As Choso smiles, looking down on him, Yuji tells him to stop. Choso though, felt like, well, he was useless in training because he gets way too sentimental. Pleading for his big bro, but quickly realizing the gravity of what Choso's doing, Yuji tells him that him being sentimental is a slight bit of an exaggeration, doesn't he think? Flashing into the brothers' dream world, and with only the two of them left now, Choso tells Yuji that he was able to learn reverse curse technique extremely quickly. Yuji, he doesn't actually think it was because of his own latent skill, adding it up to Sukuna having spent time inside his body. Choso though just tells him to straight chill. What he knows is true is that the youngest always eventually surpasses the eldest. Yuji still doesn't think it should mean he should go and abandon them, but Choso, not listening, just says he owes Yuki an apology. Apologizing to Yuji now, he promises that he won't ever leave him alone again. Making his brother question if he was thinking about the past, Yuji tells him that he was there for him at his worst, and that was enough for him. Realizing that he was right, Choso remembers back to a time where all of the brothers were still inside their test tubes. There, one of the brothers, possibly even Yuji, called out asking for their big bro, who comforted the group. He told them that they won't be bothered by the cold around them if they all talk together for just a little while. Running together now through the darkness, Choso wonders if the 150 years he experienced in the tube was only a few days for Yuji. Back in reality, a crispy and barely alive Choso thanks Yuji for being his little brother. Watching the blood sphere evaporate into the sky around him, Yuji thanks his big brother Choso for everything he's done. Looking around as the smoky environment begins to clear, Yuji calls out, but doesn't hear anything and starts to wonder where everyone is. As we learnt throughout Jujutsu Kaisen, Yuji has convinced himself that he was nothing more than a cog in the wheel, a part that will play its part no matter what. Immediately following Choso's sacrifice, Yuji was meant to avenge him, but the scorched earth that now lay before his eyes, the heat beginning to emanate, and the thin air shocked the very foundations of his determination. Walking forth through a tower of flames, Uraume Sukuna, the king of curses, and Yuji's uncle confront him once more. Gritting his teeth and calling out to him, Yuji all of a sudden notices something out of the corner of his eye, approaching them through the smoke. Freaking appearing for the first time in what actually seems like years now, big bro Todo joins his brother in battle. It's actually mental. Like, Gege was like, it's time to just kill off Yuji's only family members that he even has left. Like, you can't kill Choso off and then bring freaking Todo out. It's also crazy how, like, Drake did that Choso cosplay, and then the week he gets cooked IRL, big bro Choso dies. Like, I'm legit freaking blaming Drake for it. It's Drake's fault, bro. Elsewhere though, and back in Jujutsu Kaisen earlier on, Meimei informed Todo that using her crows and his curse technique, they'll make sure the humans inside of Sukuna's domain survive by switching them out. She warns him that this domain is one of immediate death. There is no guarantee that they'll make it out alive. However, she thinks it's better than doing nothing. To get Todo's ability to work, they'll need to drastically expand the area of effect for Boogie Woogie. She lets him know that it's most likely 4 members he'll need to target for escape, and asks if he thinks he'll still be able to do it with his arms super messed up. Not even really knowing himself, Todo just says he can feel the beats of Boogie Woogie starting back up. Immediately, he then tells Meimei to not reveal their plan to anyone else. This to him is for the simple fact that Yuji and Sukuna used to be one. Even if it was just in the past, that connection between them is strong and it could possibly result in resonance. Taking this in, Meimei agrees on the possibility of Yuji unconsciously leaking the plan to Sukuna's side and asks if that's why he doesn't want anyone else knowing. Confirming this, Todo asks that she send a message to everyone else telling them to execute Akatsu's plan well before his arrival. Which, I'm honestly kind of confused why they're telling everyone that Todo's going to show up if he doesn't want people knowing about it. Love to know down in the comments what you guys all think. Joking that there's really no need to tell the others, Meimei says she'll keep her mouth closed tightly, just like her freaking wallet. Which is like, I love Meimei, she's great. The plan, when it comes to Meimei, was that she'd actually be accompanied by Yuta to help in adjusting the curse technique output. Todo himself was totally unaware if the people he was transporting were even safe. Sadly, Yuji and Choso, who were in the center of the domain, couldn't be reached by him. Having not had the time to really explain this undercover plan to Yuji because of, the stuff we went over before, Todo just apologizes to him. However, moments after, he screams out that maybe this is all okay. Asking if he knows why it might be all okay, he says it's because they all believed. Now, all he has to do is believe as well. Weirdly enough, it's kind of funny, but Todo was somehow speaking straight facts in this moment right here. Because after the domain expansion of Uraume and Sukuna had come to its end, he is now in a state where it's extremely difficult for him to use his curse technique. Revealing something himself, Todo shows the others that he has replaced his missing left hand with an instrument called a Vibra-Slab. Smacking the ball down, Todo teleports all 3 sorcerers up into the air. Having changed the conditions for activating Boogie Woogie from a clap to a metal piece striking the box, Todo can now perform around 50 swaps per second. Striking the instrument, the 3 sorcerers then begin to rapidly swap positions. As the Vibra-Slap stops rattling, Sukuna and Yuji prepare to strike each other, only for Todo to hit the ball again and swap their positions, allowing him and Yuji to land a hefty backshot on Sukuna. With the king dazed, it's revealed that entering a binding vow that limits the number of swaps per strike, Todo can select multiple people as his abilities targets and expand its effective range massively. Plus, after adjusting his curse technique with the help of Yuta back in the Lake Gojo colony, Todo was able to help everyone escape Sukuna's malevolent shrine and get away from the center of destruction. Glancing back at him, Sukuna finds the fact that Todo showed up extremely annoying due to how he goes about fighting at his own pace, which makes it extremely difficult to beat down on him. Activating Boogie Woogie, Todo swaps Sukuna's position so he's at the bottom of a crater before jumping into the crater and instantly swapping Sukuna back with him. With Sukuna stuck in the air now, Todo readies himself and tries to land a kick, but Sukuna jumps mid-air and avoids the attack. Absolutely baffled, Todo notes how Sukuna is somehow able to use the air as footing. Yuji then comes boosting through, torques his body back, and whips a curse energy infused rock towards Sukuna. In a flash, Todo then swaps Yuji with a rock, allowing him to close in and land a brutal two-footed kick to Sukuna's chest. Undeterred, Unk grabs a hold of Yuji's face and goes to throw him, but Todo quickly teleports him out of danger, then in behind Sukuna, allowing Yuji to once again backshot the King of Curses. Stuck, unable to proceed further, Sukuna finds it impossible to adjust to Todo's swapping, especially since he can freely change the number of swaps per tap. Still, he remarks that he has learned one thing about how he can accurately read the timing of a teleport. Taking a shot from Yuji though that sends him through multiple pillars and back out into the desolate landscape of Shinjuku, the king quickly rises back to his feet and continues to say that it's the point where Yuji is at max concentration. Thinking that's exactly now, Sukuna believes Todo will faint and not swap Yuji as he did during the climax of his battle against Mahito. Suddenly glancing back, Sukuna sees one of Mei's crows appear behind him. Realizing that he misread the situation and believing Todo planned to swap Yuji with a crow, Sukuna turns around and kicks the crow. However, no Yuji ever appears and Sukuna is unable to dodge the impending strike. Once again, throwing his arm forth, Yuji Itadori strikes his stomach with another use of Black Flash. 24 chapters after he was last seen, and while Yuji, with his hands sunk into Sukuna's chest, prepared himself for the activation of the king's domain, Sukuna noticed something out of the corner of his eye. Looking over at the smoky land next to him, what then befell the King of Curses and made its way through the smoke was the vision of a man he had cut down with his own hands. The departed spirit of the strongest. Now, and feeling like Sukuna's back is pressed up against the wall, Yuji, while thinking about Choso, vows to crush his heart and win. Stopping still though, he listens as Sukuna rattles off the activation for his domain expansion. A fraction of a second later, Sukuna again snaps his head towards a figure making his way through the smoke. Now emerging from the other side of the furnace's devastation, Sukuna sees the one and only Gojo, something he assumed was impossible. With a gush of wind though, it's revealed that indeed this isn't Gojo, but someone else who's taking control of his corpse using Kenjaku's body swapping technique. Sukuna is shocked to see this, but begins laughing, apologizing and saying that he underestimated him. Shoving Yuji back and approaching Gojo, he screams that he never thought Yuta was capable of going this far. To explain all of this, we fall back in time here, probably, obviously during that month of training that we had and skipped over and didn't get any of this. There, Yuta first discussed the idea of swapping bodies with several of his mates. Maki and Hikari quickly objected to the idea. However, Hikari does say if they're all wiped out and there isn't another option, he's got to do what he has to do. Scratching his noggin, Panda explains the supposed plan for if Gojo does die. To start with, Rika will eat Kenjaku and copy his body swapping curse technique. Yuta would then use this technique to hop into Gojo's body and re-enter the fight, raising their chance of victory. Kusakabe, instead of, swallowing Kenjaku, suggests Yuta use Gojo's body and copy his limitless curse technique, but Shoko points out that he can't use the ability without the 6 eyes. Also, when it comes to copying the 6 eyes, he's unable to do that as they're a physical attribute, not a technique. Maki then points out that Yuta can only use his copy curse technique while Rika is fully manifested, which is capped at 5 minutes. She questions what will happen when that time ends, prompting Yuta to say he really doesn't know. Squeezing her gossy into the conversation though, Mei drops the likelihood that there are 3 possible outcomes. Firstly, Kenjaku's ability requires constant activation. If this happens, the body and soul won't be able to be maintained and Yuta will die. The second is that Kenjaku's ability will need to be activated intermittently. If this is the case, he won't die straight away, but it's only a matter of time. Third and final is Kenjaku's ability only needs to be activated once, and even after Rika's 5 minutes is up, he'll still be able to use Gojo's limitless technique in his new body. For the third to work though, they'll actually need to dispose of Yuta's original body, as he'll forever remain in Gojo's from then on. Yuta says he isn't against this as a final option, as even if Rika isn't fully manifested, he'll be able to use his copy ability inside of his own domain and would like to try it first before taking Gojo's body. Scowling, Maki tells him to quit talking like it's already settled, as she doesn't really like the plan at all. Yuta interrupts though, saying he's getting angry about this. From his perspective, no matter how they look at it, his plan is what they should do. Kusakabe counters that he's right as far as the plan goes, but their concern is what happens to him as a person. Getting annoyed himself, Yuta questions what he means by as a person. Fixing his gaze on the duo, he reiterates that they're going against history's strongest sorcerer. If throwing away their humanity gives them a shot at winning, that's the least they can do for victory. He questions if becoming a monster frightens everyone that badly, to which Maki says he's extremely important to all of them. Pissed now, Yuta screams out asking them, what about Gojo? Isn't he important? They've always pushed the burden of being a monster onto him alone. If Gojo goes and dies, then one of them will need to take that spot, and if no one else steps up, then he will. Later on, Yuta, still probably a little irked over the earlier conversation, asked Gojo to take over his body if he passed, to which Gojo says he doesn't care since he doesn't plan on losing. He hilariously adds that what truly upsets him is the fact that Shoko didn't object at all. Having calmed down a little bit now, Yuta relayed to Gojo about how Uro told him he's a Fujiwara descendant, whereas Gojo told him he was a Sugawara descendant. Surprised, Gojo says that, well, he is a Sugawara descendant as he can tell they're distant relatives. Plus he questions that, like, the Fujiwaras and Sugawaras were on bad terms. Not too sure even like himself about this, Yuta says Uro may have just been confused. However, Gojo poses the idea that maybe both of them were right. Glancing at his student, he guesses that Yuta may have been even more blessed than him, and it'd be extremely lame if he didn't capitalize on it. First things first though, he reminds Yuta to take care of his sloppy curse energy control. Honestly, that there is kinda cute from Dajo. I wonder if we'll ever see more of him being, you know, a so-called teacher and doing more of this in a few flashbacks with, like, perhaps Yuji. I know like he didn't really swap with Yuji, but it would be nice to see him in that 19 days or that month period just teaching Yuji a few more things before he goes off and passes on. Anyways, Gojo, after bumping into Maki, Panda and Inumaki, tells the group that they can all head back now, but they refuse. If you guys haven't realized where bro's actually headed, well, I think he's about to deal with a few of those so-called higher-ups. Knowing he can't order them to leave, Gojo says he'd rather they didn't witness something so gruesome, especially the fact he's not even sure this is the correct thing to do. However, even if he loses against Sukuna, Gakuganji will be in charge after he blasts everyone in this room, which, you know, is probably a plus to him and adds even more credence that bro's about to eliminate the higher-ups. Again, Gojo looks back and tells them to leave once more, but they reject this, with Yuta asking him to not bear the burden of being a monster alone anymore. Leaving his 4 second-year students behind, Gojo enters the room alone. He knows that nothing can be done about him being a monster, since he was left in the dust back in the past and needs to catch back up to his boy. Obviously referring to how Suguru went mad and took out all of their monsters, and now it's Gojo's turn to do the exact same thing. Skipping forwards again to the time Rin demonstrated his curse technique to Yuji and others, he explains that he amplifies the sugar in his body and manifests it externally in some way. As a side effect though, he tends to get lightheaded when using it due to his blood sugar dropping. Having a spark of genius, Shogo asks if he thinks he could transfer the sugar directly into others, to which Rin guesses is likely possible. Happy, she then designates him as a medical team member alongside herself and Nita. His role is pretty simple, as all he needs to do is administer sugar to the brain during technique activation. Moving back to the current day, and in the moments after Yuta had been rushed back to Shoko, Nita and Rin leaned over his operating table. Nita emphasized to the others around him that his technique has stopped Yuta's wounds from getting worse, but adds that he can't heal people. Furthermore, he says it's just like with Gojo, the wound is way beyond the capabilities of his reverse curse technique. Pretty much, this cements the death of Yuta's original body, and means if Kenjaku's ability needs to be activated more than once for Yuta inside of, Gojo's body and everything, after the 5 minutes that Rika is allowed to be out comes to an end, Yuta will sadly die. Looking over at Shoko, a wounded Yuta tells her he's maintaining his consciousness thanks to Rika, but even with that, he's reaching his limits. Having removed her face mask, Shoko lets him know Gojo's body has been stitched up, but once Yuta swaps, he would need to use a maximum output reverse curse technique to finish the treatment. Acknowledging this, Yuta looks down at his ring and apologizes to Rika for moving it to his right hand. Instantly flashing back to the present though, both Sukuna and Yuta simultaneously activate their domain expansions. Standing opposite each other and having thrown up identical gang signs, everyone wonders how one even counters Sukuna's open barrier type domain. Will it be through the hands of Gojo that the solution is revealed again? In a flash, both Unlimited Void and Malevolent Shrine clash. From the outside, it's shown that Yuta, like Gojo, managed to expand his domain over Sukuna's, then shrink its size down drastically. From inside the domain, Yuta relays how Gojo originally worked out a countermeasure against Sukuna's domain, called a shrunken barrier. For exactly 3 minutes, it's possible to withstand the effects of Malevolent Shrine beating down on the barrier from the outside. He's sure his switch training with Gojo allowed him to elevate his barrier techniques, and with Sukuna's current fatigue taken into account, he thinks he'll be able to maintain the domain for 3 minutes, like Gojo did. Sadly though, and I don't even know why bro thought this was gonna work. After all, Sukuna was able to rid himself of Yuta's own previously imposed 99-second time limit by restricting his domain's effective range to the outer line of Yuta's domain. Facing him down though, Yuta resolves himself to deal enough damage to Sukuna within the next 3 minutes that he drops his domain. On the other hand, Sukuna, smiling, notes that he doesn't need 3 minutes. Instead, he'll destroy Unlimited Void and expand his effective range to slaughter everyone. Locking in, Yuta goes to use blue to attack Sukuna, but the king instant transmissions all up in our boy's face. Then, using his mangled arm, Sukuna holds Yuta in place and begins landing a fast succession of punches to his face. Stunned, Yuta comes to realize that Sukuna bypasses Infinity with domain amplification, even though he'd already activated his domain. Smug, Sukuna knew all along that since Meimei's crows couldn't enter the domain in his battle with Gojo, they wouldn't have seen him use domain amplification alongside domain expansion. Well, looks like Yusa or Yugo got murked off screen in a in fine Gege fashion here, as the next thing we end up seeing is Rika in tears while tightly gripping Yuta's body in her arms. Turns out I'm just straight up wrong, and instead, back inside the domain, Yuta ducks a jab, grabs Sukuna's arm and tosses him in front of himself before landing a kick that sends Sukuna off. With some distance now between the two, Yuta notes that he can't use any other techniques other than Limitless, since Rika sadly didn't follow him over to Gojo's body. However, he also believes that from the moment Sukuna lost his hands, he hasn't unleashed a world-cutting dismantle, so in his eyes the only way for Sukuna to counter Gojo's body is to use domain amplification. Darting in and going to strike, Bro somehow, even with the advantage, misses his punch, allowing Sukuna to counter-attack. Even though Yuta had Gojo as a body swapping partner, dude reveals that he found it difficult to use his longer arms and legs along with controlling his innate technique. Quickly dodging out of the way of a misfired blue, Sukuna realizes that this is why Yuta needed these 6 eyes and tauntingly asks if he can afford to waste time before punching him away. So, back when Kenny was actually alive, the dude informed Sukuna of pretty much all of the info he had on Yuta's copy technique and how it worked. Due to having this previous knowledge, Sukuna started to question whether or not Yuta can still use all of the techniques he's copied. Even if he can, Sukuna knows he's grasped how all of them work and that he can't use them simultaneously, coming to the conclusion that Yuta can only use Limitless in his current body for 5 minutes and that he plans to finish the fight before the duration of copy ends. Sukuna suddenly starts to think about the possibility of purple being used. Knowing what he needs to do himself, Yuta remembers back to when Gojo told him how his curse energy was far too imprecise. Searching through all of his memories he had with Gojo, Yuta sticks his hand forth and begins the chant for Hollow Purple. Almost instantly cutting him off, and with his cut off hands might I say, Sukuna holds Yuta still, allowing him to land an easy punch to his face that sends the sorcerer shooting back into the center of their domain clash. Slowly rising back to his feet, Yuta surmises that the op's still on bad man time against his copy and curse techniques on top of his limitless abilities. Thinking he's super big brain though, Yuta reckons Sukuna would never expect him to use 2 copy techniques at the same time and decides to go for it. Throwing his hand forwards and activating blue, randomly a part of the domain shell shatters inwards, and with it a random voice recorder is sucked in. Turning to see what it is, Sukuna is stunned still as the recorder plays Inumaki's own voice telling Sukuna to not move. Now with the demon stuck in place and blood pouring from Inumaki's damaged throat, Yuta begins the chant for Hollow Purple. As one of the series' most prolific chants are slowly read out, Sukuna realizes that the curse speech command came from the actual user, not Yuta. Thrusting his hand forth, Yuta finishes chanting the empowered words for Hollow Purple and prepares to launch the lethal blast at the King of Curses. In a flash, the tiny domain cracks and shatters into 1,000 bits, signaling the conclusion of the domain struggle with Sukuna. Bursting through the smoke, Sukuna comes to a stop and remarks that the attack stung. However, he's lucky Yuta didn't have a clue on how to use it properly and destroyed his own domain in the process. Rushing through the smoke themselves, Yuji, Todo, and Yuta emerge to give chase. Unconcerned for his own life, Todo tells Yuta to fire off as many Hollow Purples as he wants. Even if he is in the attack path, Todo states he will use Boogie Woogie to move him and Yuji out of the way before it lands. Crashing to the floor though, it sadly turns out that the technique Yuta copied had burned out early due to his domain expansion, meaning that bro didn't even make it to the 5-minute mark. Aggravated, Yuta mentions that since Rika wasn't with him, he no longer has access to copy, and he expected to burn out Limitless, but is surprised because he just assumed Kenny's technique would keep going. Thinking back to the moment he cut down Kenny, Yuta assumes that he must have done some sort of method that allowed him to act freely after opening a domain, an ability he never received after copying Kenjaku's technique. Glancing back, briefly distracted by Yuta collapsing to the ground, Todo can then only watch as Sukuna takes advantage of this and lands a black flash on him, which not only rocks the sorcerer but snaps a part of his vibroslap off, pretty much cementing that he can no longer use the technique. Seeing this, Yuji rushes in to attack and somehow even manages to teleport in behind Sukuna as Todo strikes his own body with what remains of his vibroslap. Coughing up blood and recognizing that he was late with transporting Yuji, Todo still declares that he won't go down so quickly. As Yuji then lands a brutal punch to the face of Sukuna, the demon realizes that Todo is swapping his location with fragments of Yuta's domain. The only reason this is actually even possible to begin with is because he's hitting clumps of curse energy that can be targeted by Boogie Woogie with, whatever's left over of their vibroslap. In a fraction of a second, Yuji, with the help of Todo, rapidly teleports around Sukuna, eventually finding an opening and managing to touch the King of Curses' chest. With his palm placed on his chest, Yuji screams for Fushiguro to wake up, before activating a point-blank dismantle on the side of Sukuna's body. This attack, instead of inflicting visible damage, is actually driving a dismantle into the boundary between his and Megami's soul. Realizing Yuji made a binding veil that narrowed the curse technique's ability to tear souls apart more effectively by restricting its targets, Sukuna, while vomiting up some fingers, concluded that continuing to be hit by it would prevent him from maintaining control over his body. Quickly slurping his fingers back in, Sukuna jumps onto a wall to gain the higher ground, but Yuji quickly collapses it with Cleave. With his footing falling away, Sukuna starts to fall along with the wall, while below, Yuji readies his punch. Dodging out of the way in time though, Sukuna then counters with his own strike, sending Yuji crashing back into another wall. Smirking with confidence, Dude jokes that if he doesn't get hit, it ain't a problem. Meanwhile, Todo doubts that his spare vibroslap, crack up that he actually came with a spare instrument to this battle, would even register as his left hand for Boogie Woogie. Needing to land just a few more hits though, he begs for his snapped one to not fail him now and prepares to slap it one last time. Believing there to be no way he can swap left, Sukuna is utterly shocked when the final slap breaks the instrument and instantaneously teleports Hana above him, who already has her trumpet halfway through the ritual to unleash Jacob's Ladder. Back during the time where Hana was healing after taking a beating from Sukuna, like 70 chapters ago now, back when they first tried expelling Megami, well, it was sometime after then that Yuta asked her for help during their battle against Sukuna. He elaborated that she didn't need to participate in a battle like them and only has to fire Jacob's Ladder as a final attack. The idea behind this is that the Sorcerers want to make one last attempt at tearing Megami and Sukuna's souls apart, while making the most of Yuta's copy ability in its final moments. Clarifying what he means, Yuta thinks the average person always focuses on what techniques he's copied and how many he's got stored away without expecting the original user to make an appearance. Kinda like he just did with Inumaki's curse speech, it's even more effective after his opponent figures out the conditions for his copy to work, since most of the time they assume he's stolen it and killed the original user. However, the true strength of copy in Yuta's eyes is that it's possible to hold two of the same attacks in your hand. Which means, he's pretty much saying it's possible to keep two people alive, and then have a backup use of that ability that no one ever expected to use from the original user type thing. By the way, back in Shinjuku, Sukuna's shocked face wraps back around to see Hana blasting him with a maximum output Jacob's Ladder. Simultaneously to this, Yuji smashes the ground Sukuna is standing on, allowing the pillar of light to engulf the king's body. Darting up the rubble around him, Hana looks down to notice Sukuna quickly closing in on her. When it comes to Yuji and Todo, well, unlike the sure-hit Jacob's Ladder in Yuta's domain that targeted Sukuna because of obviously how domains work, Hana's light will now also affect Todo and Yuji. And during the purifying light, Sukuna is adamant that if he continues to race up the pillar, he can reach Angel without anyone interfering. Up in the sky, Angel screams out for Hana to quickly get some distance. However, it's too late, as before she can even notice, Sukuna appears directly behind her, still in the pillar of light. Readying another punch, Sukuna remarks that coexisting with a fully fleshed cursed means the sorcerer, or Hana in this bout, is extremely reliant on techniques, leaving them without any physical reinforcements. On top of that, losing her arm in the previous bout has drastically weakened her output in comparison to the previous time Sukuna was hit by Jacob's ladder. Darting in from a nearby ledge though, Big Toto manages to block the strike intended for Angel, which turns out to be a freaking another Black Flash. Stunned to see him back once more, Sukuna recognizes Toto as a true sorcerer. Nonetheless, the impact rockets both of the sorcerers through the side of a building and into the ground below, seemingly taking them out of the fight. With Hana out and down for the count, Sukuna turns back to finally face down Yuji, only to find that bro's already right behind him after having chased him up through Jacob's ladder. Charging a punch, Yuji socks Sukuna in the face before grabbing his legs and whipping him down through a building. Almost immediately regaining his footing though, Sukuna glances up in time to see Yuji coming in, allowing him to get on one hand and dodge his cleave. Forcing his other free hand forth, Sukuna shoots off a dismantle that Yuji weaves out of the way of. Getting caught though, Yuji is then smacked straight in the forehead with a punch from Sukuna's left hand that seemingly sends him sliding back. Charging in, it's revealed that Sukuna, after completing 2 Black Flashes, has now fully regained control over his reverse curse technique and regenerated his missing limbs. Snatching Yuji's fist out from in front of him, Sukuna finds it unnecessary to make any risky moves like Gojo had in his fight and proceeds to relentlessly pummel the young sorcerer. Jumping up and kneeing him in the head, Yuji is sent back a few feet, to which Sukuna notes that Yuji is now unable to threaten his life and can just wait until his techniques return. Touching the ground though and activating his cleave on it, Yuji breaks apart the floor and messes up Sukuna's footing. Standing back up and trying to capitalize on it, Yuji goes to strike Sukuna with a soul-rendering dismantle, but misses and hits the wall behind him. Smirking, Sukuna knows that the attack is extremely deadly to a fully fleshed curse like him. However, as he smacks Yuji in the face once more, thinks it doesn't matter if Yuji can't even land his hits. Suddenly, bringing the king back to reality, his eyes widen at the sight of something people thought impossible. Falling back into a memory, Yuji remembers the time Gojo initially taught him all about how domain expansions work, and that they expend a ton of curse energy. Trying to make it easier for Yuji to understand, he told him to think of it like a buff in gaming, and that when a granted curse technique is activated inside a domain, it always hits. Back in Shinjuku, Yuji forms a hand sign and says the words needed to expand his own freaking domain. So, due to the time spent training with Kusakabe before this battle here, Yuji was able to learn the basics of barrier techniques. Still wide-eyed and now in a train station-like setting, a confused Sukuna, who's back in Yuji's younger body here, asks, and approaching Yuji, what this place just happens to be. Yuji, appearing as he did like way back in high school before eating their finger, cheerfully tells Sukuna to follow him. And that there is where we're going to end the video for today, guys. If you have enjoyed it, then do make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you are new around here, as it really helps out with just pushing my content to a bunch of new amazing people. I am going to cover the last, I think it's going to be around 8 or 9 chapters that I like. Obviously there's 5 chapters to go in the series, as we all know. So there's like around 8 chapters that I probably will have left to cover of this arc before I'll release my entire Shinjuku Showdown arc, and then I will cover the entirety of the Jujutsu Kaisen story starting at the beginning of the anime. So of course, smash like and try and push this video to like, say 10k likes, so it shows me that you're all keen as to see the entire Jujutsu Kaisen story explained after the series or the manga comes to an end. Finally, feel free to check out the Patreon or even become a channel member to get early access or to just support me even a little bit more, as long videos like this take months of prep, as you guys have all seen. But either way, enough of me rambling on as per usual. Thank you for all the support so far, especially on the recent One Punch Man video. It's been absolutely amazing. But for now, it's been your professional degenerate Diavolo, and I will see you all in a bit. Bye.